Scarlet Stairs. Text story. My father and I were sitting on the porch in the late summer. The Florida heat lingered in the air as the sky burned pink and orange. The woods across the property buzzed with insects, and the humidity made the windows sweat with moisture. Dad sat in his chair with a half-burned cigarette at the corner of his mouth. It was our daily ritual. He worked a lot, always had my entire life, so these porch talks were something I cherished. We could spend hours out there discussing anything: history, politics, religion, values, women problems. He always comes off harsh, but he is the kind of man you can talk to about anything. As the sun sank behind the trees and the air finally began to cool, the conversation drifted, as it often did, to old places we'd lived. There were many of them. He moved a lot when I was young. Military, work, a second marriage. I don't remember most of those places clearly, only fragments. A hallway, a backyard, the way a room felt at night. When I mentioned the house in Pocatello, he went quiet in a way that immediately told me I'd said something wrong. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took a drag from his cigarette. "I didn't think you remembered that place," he said. I told him I did. Not all of it, but enough. I remembered the stairs. I didn't mean anything by that, it was just the first image that came to mind, but his reaction was immediate. He leaned back in his chair and looked out into the yard instead of at me. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. "You were very young," he said finally. 4, maybe 5. I told him I knew. That didn't seem to reassure him. He asked what else I remembered, and I found myself hesitating, suddenly unsure how much I was supposed to say. There are things you grow up learning not to bring up, even if no one ever tells you directly. That house was one of them. "I remember how white it was," I said. "And the stairs, the red ones. I always thought that was weird." I laughed, trying to cut the tension. That was when he told me it bothered him that I still remembered it at all. He said memory from that early usually doesn't last unless something anchors it. He didn't explain what he meant by that. Instead, he said there was something he'd never told me about the day we left. Something he'd kept from me for 20 years, something he'd thought I was too young to carry with me. He asked if I really wanted to hear it. That was the first time it occurred to me that whatever had happened in that house hadn't ended when we left. We moved into the house in Pocatello when I was still young enough to be excited by the idea of having a real front door. Before that, we'd lived in apartments and manufactured homes, places that all felt temporary. This house didn't. It was old and solid, with wide steps and thick walls that smelled faintly of wood and dust. I remember thinking it felt like a place people stayed. What I remember most clearly is the way it looked when we first arrived. The exterior was painted a bright, almost blinding white, layered thick over old wooden paneling. The stairs leading up to the front door were painted red. Too red, even to a child's eye. They stood out sharply against the white of the house and the fresh-cut grass, rising to a large black door that always seemed to soak in the daylight. Something about those stairs made me uneasy, though I didn't have language for that feeling at the time. I remember pausing on them more than once, looking down at my feet before climbing the rest of the way up. But I was excited too. I had my own room for the first time, and the town itself felt friendly and familiar in a way other places hadn't. Inside, the house was quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Sound didn't travel the same way it had in our previous places. Footsteps seemed softer, voices more distant. The floors were dark, worn wood, and light came through the windows in narrow bands that shifted slowly across the walls as the day went on. My room was down a hallway that always felt longer at night. It wasn't large, but it was mine. I spent most of my time there on the floor, surrounded by toys, drawing or building things I never finished. From my window I could see the yard and the garden my father and his wife worked on in the evenings. During the day, it felt safe. At night, the house felt different. I don't remember anything specific happening at first. No noises I could point to, no shapes in the dark, but I remember being aware of the space around me in a way I hadn't been before. Doors seemed farther away. Corners felt deeper. I always asked my father to keep my door open, even though I couldn't have explained why. Downstairs, the basement was finished but rarely used. It stayed cool year-round and smelled faintly of concrete and old air. I didn't spend much time down there, but I remember the light switch at the top of the stairs, and the way the light looked when it was on. Dull and yellow, seeping up through the gaps in the dark floorboards above. At the time, it didn't mean anything to me. It was just the way the house was. The first things that happened weren't frightening. They were irritating. My father worked long hours then as he does now. When he came home, he was usually tired, already halfway thinking about the next day. Most nights he stayed up later than the rest of us, sitting at the kitchen table or in the living room with paperwork spread out in front of him, a cup of coffee going cold beside his elbow, and a cigarette always between his fingers. The house would be quiet by the time he finally decided to go to bed. That was when he started noticing the light. The basement was finished, but it wasn't a place we used often. It was too cool, too dim, and it never quite felt like part of the rest of the house. The light switch was at the top of the stairs, just inside the doorway. When the light was on, it bled up through the gaps in the dark floorboards above, faint yellow lines stretching across the wood like something trying to surface. The first time he saw it, he assumed he'd forgotten to turn it off. He went downstairs, flipped the switch, and stood there for a moment listening. The basement was quiet. No hum from the light. No sound of anyone moving. Satisfied, he came back upstairs and went to bed. The next night, it was on again. He noticed it while locking up the house, the faint glow visible through the floor near the kitchen. He frowned, cursed under his breath, and went back down the stairs. Off again. Another moment of standing still, another quick glance around, then back upstairs. By the third or fourth time, it had started to irritate him. He asked his wife if she'd been down there late at night, if she'd left the light on by accident. She said no. He asked me once casually if I'd been playing in the basement. I hadn't. I only ever went down there with one of them. It kept happening anyway. Some nights it would be off. Other nights it would be on again, always late, always after the house had gone quiet. He began checking it automatically before bed, annoyed as he headed for the stairs. Sometimes he'd turn it off and find it on once he reached the main floor. It turned into a small, pointless battle with the house, one that never escalated enough to demand real attention, but never stopped either. I didn't know about any of this at the time, or if I did, it didn't register. Looking back, I realize it was the first thing that made my father uneasy, not afraid, not yet, just aware. He didn't talk about it much. He didn't pray over it or call anyone about it. He did what he always did when something didn't make sense. He ignored it and kept working. The light wasn't hurting anyone. It wasn't costing him anything but a few extra steps down the stairs. But it was persistent. By the time anything truly frightening happened, the house already felt different, quieter somehow. The wooden floors felt darker and heavier, as if it had learned our routines and was testing how much we would overlook. It happened one ordinary afternoon. The sun was high, pouring through my bedroom window. I remember the breeze flowing through the curtains. I was playing with a friend from school. We had spread our craft store animal toys across the floor. The large rug our ocean for little sharks and whales, arranging them in patterns and making up grand stories. The air was warm and still, the kind of quiet that makes a house feel like home. My father's wife came in to tell us that my friend's mother was outside, waiting to take him home. We said our goodbyes and I heard them leave, their voices drifting across the yard. I began to gather the toys, putting them into the box I always kept in my closet. I paused to look out the window. My father and stepmother were talking in the garden. They seemed calm, unhurried. I placed the box in the closet and began to rummage through another for more toys. Then it happened. I felt it before I even understood it. Two large hands pressed hard against my upper back. The shove sent me stumbling into the closet, the doors slamming shut behind me. Darkness complete. I couldn't see a thing. I couldn't even think about what had pushed me. All I felt was a sudden, overwhelming dread and a strange, insistent compulsion not to turn around. I screamed, of course. I cried. I banged against the closet walls, hoping someone would hear me. I remember the air smelled faintly of wood polish and dust. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. It was one of the first times I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. My father came running. He must have heard my screams from outside. I could hear him pounding on the closet doors, calling my name. He tried to pull the doors open. They didn't budge at first. Then he began smashing his heel into them. The doors splintered and he ripped me out. Nothing else happened. Just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The closet was empty. I was shaking. My father held me tight. I remember the quiet afterward, the kind that fills a room when everyone has stopped breathing at the same time. After that, my feelings won the house completely changed. Pressure began to fill the house. It wasn't that anything visible had changed. The walls were the same white, the sun still fell through the windows in the same narrow bands. But the air was heavier, colder somehow, and the shadows seemed longer. Hallways felt more confining. My room, once a place of comfort, felt hollow, and the window looking out over the yard no longer reassured me. None of us wanted to be alone there anymore. I stopped going into the hallways without company. My father spent more time in the workshop or outside, avoiding the house when he could. He wouldn't talk about what had happened. I could tell he didn't want to acknowledge it. That was his way of keeping it from becoming real. My stepmother took a different approach. She spent hours in the kitchen with books open, reading about ways to cleanse and protect a home. She tried sage, incense, and prayers. Sometimes she moved through the rooms muttering softly, fumbling with bundles of dried herbs. My father allowed it, though reluctantly, and mostly stayed away while she worked. After that, the house seemed to settle somewhat. It wasn't the same as before, but the oppressive weight lifted just enough that daily life could continue. Still, I noticed changes in small ways. Doors that used to swing easily now creaked even when touched lightly. Floors groaned under no weight. Shadows in corners shifted as if avoiding the light. At night, the basement smelled stronger, sharper, colder. The house seemed aware of our movements and of our reluctance to be alone. I tried to ignore it, focusing on toys, games, friends, and school. But there was a tension always in the background, a quiet waiting, and I realized even as a child that it wasn't going away entirely. Months later, I left to visit my mother. When I returned, the feelings I once had, the excitement, pride, and comfort were gone. The scarlet stairs, once vivid and playful in my memory, now seemed like a sprawling tongue of some great monster, something I had to climb carefully, as if each step required a conscious effort. The hall by my room was darker, longer, and I could feel the house itself pressing around me. By then, I understood one thing. Whatever had happened in that closet had changed the house, and in some ways it had changed us too. It was late, quiet, the kind of night where all outside sounds diminish into eerie stillness. I had been sleeping in my room, the door open as usual, when my father woke to get a glass of water. On his way back, he said, he felt the need to check on me. When he opened the door, he froze. According to him, I was standing on my bed. My eyes had rolled back, showing only the whites. My arms were extended in a stiff, strange formation, something like an arrow, my father would later say. I was moving my lips, forming words, but nothing came out that anyone could understand. He grabbed me immediately. I remember being too frightened to even register the comfort of his hands. He held me tight, commanding, praying to Christ, speaking aloud in a way that made him sound both furious and terrified. His voice boomed through the house and woke my stepmother. I don't remember the words he said. I only remember the sensation, the pressure of his hands, the sound of his voice filling the room. Then it was over, just like the closet. I was normal again. The bed, the blankets, the room, everything was as it had been. After that night, nothing else happened at that level of intensity. We moved soon after, living with my grandparents for a while until things settled elsewhere. Even years later, he said he thought I was making the sign of the cross with my body, but it had looked more like an arrow, deliberate and odd. For him, it was terrifying. For me, it was confusing. And for both of us, it left a mark on the memory of that house that never faded. Years later, as we sat together on that porch in the late summer evening, the Florida heat softening as it faded into evening, we talked about many things as we always did: life, work, small worries, but inevitably, the house in Pocatello came up again. He told me he was surprised I remembered it at all. "I didn't think any of that would stick," he said. "You were so young." I told him I remembered the scarlet stairs, the hallways, the basement light. He nodded, listening, but his eyes seemed distant, like he was weighing whether he should say more. Then he paused, long enough for me to realize that something important was coming. He told me that the day we finally moved, he and my aunt were outside, packing the last boxes into the moving truck. As they worked, he said, both of them looked up. The sky was dark with clouds and the stairs looked like an open wound. Both of them saw it. A black silhouette, watching from my bedroom window. He hadn't told me because he decided I was too young to know such things, too innocent to carry it. He had assumed I would forget it with the years. I didn't respond at first. The image, 20 years later, pressed itself into my mind with the same sudden sharpness it must have had in my father's eyes that day. I could see it, standing there against the dark glass of the window, impossibly still. Unseen eyes boring holes into me. We didn't speak about it again, never to be brought up. The story dying with the last ember of his cigarette, but the memory lingered as all the others did. The stairs, the closet, the basement light. A quiet reminder that some things, no matter how long ago, don't end when you leave them behind. I discovered my medical records. My family has been lying to me. Text story. Hello everyone, my name is Donovan. I've recently discovered a horrific truth about myself that has kept me confined to my bedroom for the last week. A truth that changed the trajectory of my life and irreversibly altered my brain. And to think it was just so accidental. Just one small incident and I was forced to face the brunt of reality. For years, I went about my life as though nothing was wrong. I didn't feel any different than anyone else. I didn't see myself as anything more than just another teenager, managing his way through the murky waters of high school. I did struggle finding friends, though. That was a big weakness of mine. I'd greet people offhandedly in the hallways, and they'd greet me back, often through cold stares, but I could never manage finding a group that I really fit into. What helped me tremendously during those lonely times was my vibrant home life. I could not have asked for better parents. My mother worked as an accountant, and my father had invested a ton into Apple before it really became the corporate giant that it is today. Mom worked from home for the most part, and Dad had retired the minute he made his first 10 million. My mother didn't work because she had to. She liked to work. She liked knowing that she served a purpose other than being my dad's trophy wife. She hated being referred to as that. A trophy wife, she'd say. Such an outdated term. She never let her disdain show, however. She'd simply smile wider, flashing her beautifully white teeth, before laughing and thanking the person for the compliment, her fist balled tightly at her side. And before you even think it, yes, my father loved my mother. They were soulmates. She was the woman who had his heart, and he had hers. Though our house was bigger, the love remained the same. Writing this now, it feels like my brain is just covering for me. I know what I know, and I just can't force myself to believe what I know isn't real. My parents were very attentive, not helicopter parents but caring parents. They were there for me when I needed them most. I can't tell you how many times I'd come home from a long day at school only to find my dad in the kitchen, whipping up some homemade supper, while my mom lay curled up on the couch, knitting the same scarf as always as she waited for me to tell her about my day. Dad brought the food, and Mom brought the comfort, and together we'd sit for hours while I rambled on about what was bothering me. Together we'd dissect the problem, find the solution, and by the end, I'd feel brand new. So much stress for such a young boy, Mom would sigh. You need to learn to relax, sweetie. Dad would agree, his favorite phrase being, "All things pass, Donovan," which he'd announce like a mantra before picking a movie for us to watch while Mom made hot tea for each of us. Mom's tea always made me feel better, no matter how hard a day I had been having. Made with love and a special secret ingredient that only your dad knows about, she'd slyly announce with a wink to my father, who'd flash her a smile from his spot on the sofa. As high school came to an end, and it was time to choose a real career path, I had no other job in mind other than firefighting. I loved the idea of doing work that mattered, helping people when they were in dire need. Little did I know, this decision would become the one that unraveled my mind piece by piece. You see, there are a few things you need to join the force, one of them being your medical records. Simple enough, right? My parents disagreed. They more than disagreed. They discouraged me from even wanting to join. From the moment they found out that joining meant sharing my medical records, they were completely against my plan. I found that comfort came less and less these days. Mom stopped knitting. Dad stopped cooking. We hardly spent any time together at all. One thing that never changed, however, as though a small gesture of hope, was that my mother continued to make my tea. She'd either hand it to me rudely or I'd awake to find it sitting on my nightstand. Other than that, though, it felt like my parents were slowly turning their backs on me. It's not like I wouldn't ask them to support me. I'd pretty much beg them for assurance and help with my mental state. It was as though they ignored me every single time. "You're grown now, Donovan. You can figure this out yourself. Your father and I want no part in it," my mom would taunt coldly. We argued a lot more than we'd ever done before. It really tore me apart to feel such intense coldness coming from someone who was as warm as my mother. Dad was no different. He just seemed to stop caring, as if my decision to join the fire department was a betrayal of him. "We have more money than you could count in a lifetime, son. Why? Why do you want to do something as grueling as firefighting? I could make a call and have you in Harvard like that," he pressed, punctuating his last word with a snap of his fingers. "It's work that matters, Dad. I want to help people. I want to be good. I don't know why you and Mom don't understand that." He looked at me like I had just slapped him in the face before marching upstairs without another word. As days dragged on, what had started as small gestures of disapproval soon turned into snarls of malice and disgust. After weeks of insults and cruelties hurled at me by both my mom and dad, everything culminated in one event where my dad led me to the garage. Locking the door behind him, he got into his Mercedes and started the engine. He revved the car 4 or 5 times, and soon the garage became filled with carbon monoxide gas. The entire time while I pounded on the window begging him to stop, he just sat there, stone-faced, before cracking his window and teasing, as calm as could be. "Call the fire department, see if they'll come save you." He then rolled the window back up and revved the engine a few more times. I could feel my vision beginning to swim, and I was on the verge of passing out when the garage door flung open, and Mom pulled me into the house. She left me lying on the floor as she fanned me with some of her accountant papers while I struggled to recover. Once my vision had gone back to normal and I could actually breathe again, Mom leaned in close and whispered, "Now did the fire department save you? Or did your mother?" And as quickly as she appeared, she disappeared back upstairs to her office. Dad followed swiftly behind her, stepping over me like I was trash before trotting up the stairs without so much as glancing at me. This was the moment I made my decision to leave home. I didn't care how happy we once were. Happiness seemed foreign now. Safety seemed foreign now. I was going to get into the department whether they liked it or not. And I was going to be gone before they even got the chance to realize it. I stood to my feet and dusted myself off, mentally preparing to go upstairs to pack my things. I'd live out of my car if I had to. As I climbed the stairs at the top, I was greeted by my mother and father. They looked down on me, wordlessly, disappointingly, before shaking their heads and returning to their bedroom in unison. Whatever. I packed a week's worth of clothes, enough to get away for a while and clear my head before coming back for the rest. As I walked out my front door, I glanced over my shoulder for one last look at the house before I completely separated it from my heart. Dad looked at me. He had a mixture of sadness, regret, and sorrow on his face as he said his goodbyes. "Be seeing ya, son," was all he could manage. That's all I got from the man I once looked up to, the man who had just attempted to murder me in the garage. And so I left. I left for the very last time. Well, for the last time in which I'd felt whole at least. The drive to the medical center was an extremely emotional one. It was as if I could hear my parents' voices. Their "I love yous," Mom's words of reassurance, and Dad's mantra. They all floated around in my head and caused my eyes to fill with tears. By the time I'd reached the medical center, I was a blubbering mess and had to clean myself up in the parking lot before going inside. I provided the front desk lady with my social security number, and I waited for her to return with my records. I took some comfort in knowing that I was one step closer to my dream, despite how my parents felt. But the collapse of my family weighed heavily on my chest. With a stoic expression, the lady returned and slid the papers to me along with my social security card. As I sat in my car reading through the paperwork, I could feel the breath in my lungs evaporate while my heart seemed to stop beating. I rushed home, tears staining my cheeks and my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles a minute. I swung the front door open and screamed for my parents in a broken voice, but the house remained quiet. I raced upstairs, praying to God that they would be in their bedroom, but what I found instead was an empty room, void of any furniture, not even a bed. In the living room, I found my mom's scarf, still sitting in her place on the sofa, still unfinished. In the kitchen, right by the tea kettle, was what made me fall to my knees and wail in sheer agony. My parents weren't here. They'd never been here. I had been experiencing an excruciating slip, and this little orange bottle of haloperidol proved it. My parents are dead. They died tragically when I was 17, and I had to listen to their screams of pain as they were roasted alive in a house fire at a party they were attending. My dad's retirement party, which had been thrown at a friend's house. I had been waiting outside after my mom assured me that they'd be leaving here in a few minutes. Before the fire broke out, trapping all 20 of the guests inside. I wanted to help. I wanted to free them from the inferno, but I was too weak. I couldn't even get near the flames. Remorse, dread, and the terrifying realization that I had been living a lie all hit me at once like a freight train from hell. And that's why I'm here. Locked away in this bedroom. I can't cope with leaving right now. But I think I'm getting better. I truly believe that I'll be on the rise eventually, but for now, I just want to lie here, alone. As I said, it's been about a week. A week of nothing but darkness and mopping for me. However, as I'm writing this, I believe that I smell that sweet aroma of my mother's tea, freshly brewing in my kitchen, and I think I'm gonna go see if she'll pour me a glass. I was hired to transcribe old police tapes. One recording was never logged. Text story. I took the job because it was easy money, transcribing old police audio from the late 90s, mostly static, drunk calls, domestic disputes, nothing dramatic. The department was digitizing archives. That's all they told me. They warned me about poor audio quality. They didn't warn me about content. Most tapes were boring, officers sounding tired, callers slurring words, occasional screaming that cut out too early to matter. After a few days, I stopped really listening. I typed on autopilot. Then I found tape 47A. No label, no case number, just masking tape with "do not copy" written in faded marker. I assumed it was misplaced. I almost skipped it, almost. The tape started with silence, not static silence, the kind that makes you think your headphones unplugged. Then a man whispered, "It's standing in the hallway." I checked the waveform. This wasn't interference. Someone meant to speak that softly. The dispatcher asked for his address. The man gave it, but something was wrong. He kept correcting himself. "No, sorry, that's where it was. It moved." There was a long pause. You could hear breathing, not his, something wet, close to the microphone. The dispatcher told him to stay on the line and asked if anyone else was in the house. "Yes," the man said, "but they're pretending to sleep." Another pause. "I think it's telling them not to move." I stopped typing. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was fake, a prank call, people do that. Then I noticed something strange. The dispatcher never once asked him to clarify what it was. It was like she already knew. She just said, "Sir, do not look directly at it." The man started crying. "I already did," he whispered. It smiled like it was embarrassed. There was a sudden loud thump. The man screamed. Papers fell. Something dragged across the floor. The audio spiked so hard it distorted. Then everything went quiet again. For 30 seconds, nothing. Then a child's voice spoke clearly into the phone. "Is it gone now?" the child asked. The dispatcher answered, "No, sweetheart, but it's learning." The tape ended there. No police arrival, no resolution, no follow-up tape. I searched the database. There was no address matching what he gave, no report filed that night, no missing persons, nothing. But that wasn't the worst part. The timestamp on the recording said it was logged at 2:17 a.m. At 2:17 a.m., I heard something outside my apartment. Slow footsteps in the hallway, bare feet, careful like someone didn't want to be noticed. I froze. I live alone. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number texted me, "Do not look directly at it." I didn't respond. I turned off all the lights and sat perfectly still. The footsteps stopped outside my door. Something leaned against it. I could hear breathing, wet, familiar. Then very softly, right against the wood, a voice whispered, "I think it remembers you now." I quit the job the next morning, returned the tapes, said nothing. Last night, I found masking tape on my bedroom wall. 3 words, written carefully in faded marker. "Do not copy." I was abducted, and I'm finally ready to tell my story. Text story. It was 2012. My high school football team had just gotten back from an away game. It was around 2 a.m. My school was very small. To put it into perspective, the town only had a population of 500 people. It was a 20-minute rural drive back to my house. I was halfway home when a bright white light appeared in the sky. It was roughly the size of a quarter in my field of vision. I couldn't make out any distinguishing features of the craft other than the brightness of the light. I remember pulling over onto the shoulder of the road and just staring at it. The next thing I remember is waking up on a metallic table with beings surrounding me. I felt an extremely intense pain in my left wrist. I was terrified and started hyperventilating. I heard a voice in my head telling me not to fear. I think they must have put me back to sleep. because the next thing I remember is being in a different part of what I can only imagine was the craft. It was extremely disorienting. I was sitting in a white, floating chair. It had a curved seat and curved armrests. My hands and ankles were secured, but not with anything tangible. It felt almost magnetically attached. It was not painful, and I couldn't feel the restraints at all. The craft was extremely large on the inside. It's difficult to explain what I was seeing. It was like ladders shifting in unnatural ways. The material was metallic but reflected light strangely, purple from one direction, gold from another. It seemed like there were hundreds of beings working, but I wasn't sure if there were actually hundreds or if I was seeing reflections of the same beings. I say that because they appeared to mirror each other's movements. While it's not completely analogous, imagine the kaleidoscope patterns from the Doctor Strange movies filtered over the interior of the ship. The beings looked like the traditional grays depicted in Close Encounters: gray skin, almond-shaped eyes, roughly 3.5 feet tall. The only exception was the one manipulating something to my left. I'm not sure what he was doing, but I saw distortion effects around his hands. He was taller, but his body shape was very similar to the others. He had white skin instead of gray, and his eyes were red, with pupils just like ours. I asked him what they were doing to me. In my mind, I heard him say that they were helping me. I asked how, and he said that he was incapable of saying. I asked whether he was not allowed or simply incapable, and he expressed that I would not be able to comprehend it. I asked him to try anyway, and he reiterated that I would not comprehend. I'm a fairly curious person overall, and I've had a fascination with aliens ever since I was a little kid watching the History Channel with my dad. After the initial shock, my interest superseded my fear. I knew I wasn't going to die. They didn't tell me that, and I'm not sure if it was something they influenced me to believe or if it was because I had never heard of someone being killed during an abduction. So I took the opportunity to ask as many questions as I could. I asked where they were from, and he said Zeta Reticuli. I asked about their home world, and he advised that while they originated in the Zeta Reticuli system, they no longer consider it their home planet. I asked where their home planet was, and he said they had evolved past that. I asked what he meant by that, and again received the answer that I was incapable of understanding. I'm not sure if he was being truthful or intentionally obfuscating. For all I know, everything he told me could have been a lie. However, I could somehow sense his emotions, and it felt like he was being forthcoming, though that too could have been something he was masking. I asked how many alien races there are. I got the sense that he found that question humorous. He stated that it is not within their capability to know how many civilizations exist in the universe, but that there are 8 galaxy-traversing races and thousands of civilizations that are not yet spacefaring in the Milky Way. I asked why humans and greys look so similar. I asked if they seeded us. He advised that they did not. He stated that while not all intelligent life forms are humanoid or even carbon-based, the majority are, primarily due to the advantages the form provides. I asked if any race had seeded humanity. He advised that humanity initially evolved on Mars and jump-started complex cellular life on Earth. Apparently, single-celled organisms had already evolved on Earth at that point. I asked how long ago that was, and he said roughly 2 billion years ago, but advised that time was not the same for those humans as it is for us. I asked if those humans are still present, and he stated that they are, but that they are different from us. He said they have manipulated genes hundreds of times throughout our history, even prior to the existence of primates on the planet. I asked if these previous humans were trying to colonize Earth, since Mars is no longer habitable. He stated that this race of humans has no interest in colonizing Earth, as they inhabit multiple planets. Their interest in Earth is scientific in nature, as is his own. I asked if there were any hostile alien species. He advised that in order for a civilization to advance to a certain point, It must put its proclivity for violence behind it. Otherwise, it will destroy itself before becoming advanced enough to traverse the galaxy. I asked if he thought we would ever reach that point. He said humanity is on the cusp of transcending into the next stage of civilizational evolution and needs guidance. I told him this was amazing news. I asked if he wanted to smoke a bowl to celebrate humanity's advancement. He agreed and took me to his weed stash. He told me they have access to any strain I could ever want. Obviously, I chose Alien Kush. Once we smoked a bowl, I asked him if aliens shit like humans do. He said, "Nah bro, that's gross." Apparently, that was one of the first things they got rid of when they started manipulating genes. I asked him if he'd ever been to a strip club. He had flown over a few of them but had never actually gone inside. I told him we had to go, like right now. We put him in a trench coat, a top hat, and some sunglasses, and decided to hit up some Vegas strip clubs. It was a blast. After puking in the parking lot, he looked me in the eyes and telepathically told me, "You're a real one, bro." I replied that it was the best night of my life. He told me he had to leave and go back to his ship. I asked if I would ever see him again. He said, "Anything is possible," and winked. Bye, Larry. That was the last thing I said to him. Then I woke up in my car and went home. The night shift doesn't end. Text story. I took the night shift because it paid more, and because the building was supposed to be empty after midnight. That was the first lie. I work security at a long-term care facility that shut down its West Wing 3 years ago. Mold, structural issues. Unsafe for residents, they said. The doors were sealed, badge access disabled, lights cut. My job was simple. Sit at the desk, watch cameras, make rounds every 2 hours, and call it in if anything moved where it shouldn't. On my third night, camera 12 flickered back on. Camera 12 faces the West Wing nurses' station. At first I thought it was a system glitch, static, then a washed-out image like an old VHS tape. But the timestamp was current. 2:17 a.m. The lights were on. The counter was clean. A wheelchair sat perfectly centered in the hallway, facing the camera like it had been placed there deliberately. I radioed maintenance, no answer. Then the wheelchair rolled forward. Not fast, not pushed. It crept forward an inch, stopped, then turned slightly, as if correcting its angle. The wheels squealed the way old rubber does when it's dry. I stood up. My reflection in the monitor glass looked pale, wrong. I remember thinking I should feel afraid, but instead I felt expected, like the building had been waiting for me to notice. My radio crackled, not maintenance, not dispatch. A woman's voice said very calmly, "You're late." I checked the logbook. My name was written on the last line in ink I didn't recognize, beneath a date that hadn't happened yet. Under notes, someone had written, "He always watches the camera first." I left the desk and walked toward the West Wing. The doors weren't sealed anymore. They stood open, the air inside colder than the rest of the building, smelling faintly of antiseptic and rot. The overhead lights hummed, and somewhere deep inside, something was coughing. Wet, rattling, patient. The wheelchair was gone. As I stepped inside, the door behind me shut with a soft, polite click. The nurse's station looked wrong up close. Charts were stacked neatly, but every name on them had been scratched out. The phones were off the hook, dangling, cords twisted together like veins. A clock on the wall ticked backward. Then I saw them. Residents. Dozens of them standing in the hallway facing away from me. IV poles beside them. Wristbands still attached. Some were missing pieces, hands, jaws, eyes, but they stood straight, obedient, like they were waiting for instructions. One of them turned around. It was wearing my face. Not a copy, not a mask. Mine, down to the tired eyes and the scar on my chin. It smiled, practiced, the way you do when you're pretending everything is fine. "You can go," it said. "I'll finish your shift." The others began to shuffle toward me, slow and careful, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. Their mouths opened, and they spoke in unison, voices overlapping like a badly tuned radio. "Clock out." I ran. I don't remember getting out. I don't remember driving home. I woke up in my bed at 8:03 a.m. with my uniform folded neatly on the chair and my radio on the nightstand, still warm. There was a voicemail on my phone. It was my voice whispering, "You forgot to sign out." I quit that morning. But every night at 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzes with a notification from an unknown camera feed. Camera 12 is still running. And whatever's wearing my face hasn't missed a shift yet. I found a finger in my mom's Thanksgiving dinner. Text story. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Well, I hope it's happy for you. For me, personally, this is the strangest and most terrifying Thanksgiving I've had yet. My mom, she started to lose it this year. I'm not sure where it came from. Surely somewhere deep within her troubled mind there was something that just snapped, or clicked, or disappeared entirely. If I had to guess, though, I'd say it was because of the divorce. My father had been having an affair. The young secretary from his office, the one that my mom had no idea about. Not only that, she had caught them in her own house, in her own bed. Things got bleak after that. There were no loud arguments, no fighting or even any name-calling. What the house did have, however, was a horrible silence that was broken only by the sounds of my mom's gentle sobs. It was a kind of silence that made you afraid of what the next loud sound would be, the kind that told you that it would be deafening and electrifying. She hardly left her room, and when she did, it was only for a few brief moments, either to use the bathroom or to make herself whatever food she could find lying around the house. I wanted her back. I wanted her quiet warmth that comforted, the one that had been gone for so long. After a few months of her reclusiveness and seclusion, it seemed as though her sobs subsided. No longer were nights spent awake, listening to her as she fought to stifle her cries. Instead, she seemed to take up humming, buzzing loudly to the tunes of Happy Birthday and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I figured she did this as a way to concentrate her sadness into something more meaningful than crying. Little did I know, however, that wasn't the reason. The reason was because my mom had lost every ounce of what was once a sound and steady mind. Upon checking up on her one night, just to ensure she was at least still somewhat stable, I found her motionless. She was sprawled across the bed, bottle of pain pills in hand, that spilled out onto the floor. Her vomit dribbled from her chin and onto her nightgown, and for the first time in my life, I felt gripping fear that I was going to lose my mother. I did what I had to do, rushing to the nearest cell phone and immediately dialing 911, and luckily, they were able to save her life. She spent a few nights in the hospital. Then, after completing her stay, they moved her to our local mental hospital. They kept her there for a few weeks because, no matter what, she would not get a hold of herself. She had lost all control of what was left of her mind, and for a while there, we thought it'd never return. That changed in the weeks leading up to Halloween, though. She seemed to be slowly getting back to her normal self, smiling every now and again, and even laughing more than I'd heard her laugh since the divorce. The week before Halloween, she was back to her normal self, and I had never been happier. I thanked God every day for giving my mom back. There were a few slips, a few times where I thought she may be relapsing back into her old ways. She'd leave the house at odd hours of the night, only to return covered in sweat and out of breath. I confronted her about this, and she assured me she was only going out for some nighttime runs. "It clears the mind," she'd tell me. And of course, I believed her. This whole routine continued all throughout the month of November, and never once did she let on how broken she truly was, how depraved she had become. The day before Thanksgiving, she had spent the entire day cooking in the kitchen. She forced my brother and I to remain in our rooms while she did so, claiming that she wanted our dinner to be a surprise. We obliged, doing as we were told. A few hours into the morning, the house began to fill with the most delicious aromas that I had ever had the pleasure of inhaling. The rolls, the mashed potatoes, oh my goodness, the pies. She was in that kitchen cooking miracles. Around 5 o'clock, she fetched my brother and I. When we entered the dining room, she had made the table look like a scene out of a literal movie. Tray after tray of every traditional Thanksgiving dish we could have asked for, all resting atop the autumn-themed tablecloth that she pulled from our attic. It seemed as though we had everything but the turkey. Her response when questioned about this was simply, "Wanted to try something different this year. I like to challenge myself." Nevertheless, my brother and I eagerly sat down, waiting to devour whatever she put in front of us. First she served us our sides, green beans, corn, yams, you get the idea. The sight of the sides alone was enough to make my mouth salivate, and I had to close it to prevent from drooling all over the table. The next thing she served was what appeared to be pulled pork right in the center of our turkey-shaped plates. The steam rose from the plate and permeated my nostrils. I cannot explain to you how magnificent that meat smelled. It felt as though something primal was unlocked in my brain the moment the scent came over me. "You boys eat fast," my mother chirped. "The dessert will be ready soon and I don't want it getting cold, so gobble gobble." She didn't have to tell us twice. My brother went straight for the candy's yams. I, however, began devouring that meat. The taste was indescribable, immeasurable, absolutely amazing. I scarfed it down and was asking for seconds before having even touched my sides, to which my mother eagerly obliged. This time, she gave me 2 helpings of the pork, and I may as well have gone feral the way I was eating that stuff. I just couldn't stop. I began getting strange looks from my brother, who poked at his serving nervously. My mother simply laughed and clapped her hands together, giving herself a tiny celebration at the fact that her dinner was delicious. Upon my 3rd serving, however, I noticed something that immediately made the food in my stomach beg to be released from whence it came. Hidden within my pile of shredded pork was my father's wedding ring. The ring that he had given back to my mother once the divorce was finalized. Not only a wedding ring, but the entire finger that it had once been slipped onto so lovingly. My mother stared at me, eyes still sparkling, smile still curled across her face. "What's the matter, honey?" I thought about the question for a moment, thought about the situation. After considering what to do, I responded. "Nothing, Mom," I responded, digging back into the feast that she had whipped up. "Nothing at all." I've been driving rigs for 15 years. Last month, I pulled into the wrong gas station, and I'm lucky to be alive. Text story. Alright, I don't know where else to put this. I tried to file a report, and the look I got from the officer was one step away from asking me to take a breathalyzer. My company dispatcher thinks I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But I know what I saw. I know what almost happened. I've been driving rigs for 15 years and I've seen some strange things on the asphalt sea, but nothing like this. So I'm putting it here, a warning. For any of you guys running the long haul, or even just a family on a road trip, burning the midnight oil to make it to grandma's by morning. If you see this place, you push that pedal to the floor and you don't look back. You run on fumes if you have to. It's better than the alternative. It happened about 3 weeks ago. I was on a cross-country run, hauling a load of non-perishables. The kind of gig that's more about endurance than anything else. Just you, the hum of the Cummins diesel and the endless ribbon of blacktop unwinding in your high beams. The section of highway I was on is notoriously empty. It's a dead zone. No radio signal worth a damn, no cell service for 100 miles in either direction. It's the kind of place that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. A tiny capsule of light and noise moving through an infinite, silent void. I'm usually pretty good with my fuel management. It's second nature after this long, but I'd been pushing it, trying to make up time I lost at the way station. The needle on the diesel gauge was kissing E with a little too much affection. The low fuel light had been blinking patiently for the last 20 miles, a tiny orange beacon of my own stupidity. I started doing the math, calculating mileage, and a cold sweat started to prickle my neck. Getting stranded out here wasn't just an inconvenience, it was dangerous. Just as a genuine knot of panic began to tighten in my stomach, I saw it. Up ahead, a faint, sickly yellow glow bleeding into the oppressive darkness. It wasn't much, just a single light, but it was enough. As I got closer, the shape resolved itself. A small, single-story building with a low, flat roof and a short awning over a pair of fuel pumps. The sign was old, the kind with the plastic letters you can change by hand. A few letters were missing, so it read something like AS and AT. The light I'd seen was coming from a single, flickering fluorescent bulb under the awning, which cast long, dancing shadows and made the whole place look like it was underwater. Everything about it screamed, "Keep driving." The paint was peeling off the walls in long strips like sunburnt skin. The pumps looked ancient, the kind with the rotating numbers instead of a digital display. The whole lot was cracked asphalt and weeds, but my gauge was now defiantly sitting on empty, and beggars can't be choosers. With a sigh that felt like it came from my boots, I geared down, the air brakes hissing in protest, and swung the big rig into the lot. The trailer tires crunched over loose gravel. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent light and the faint, frantic chirping of crickets. I climbed down from the cab, my legs stiff. The air was cool and smelled of dust and distant rain. Through the grimy plate glass window of the station, I could see one person, a small figure standing behind a counter. The bell above the door let out a weak, tinny jingle as I pushed it open. The inside smelled of stale coffee, dust, and something else, something vaguely metallic and sweet like old pennies. The shelves were mostly bare. A few dusty cans of off-brand beans, a rack of sun-bleached chips, a cooler that hummed loudly but seemed to contain nothing but shadows. The only person there was an old woman. She was tiny, almost bird-like, with a cloud of thin, white hair and a face that was a roadmap of wrinkles. She wore a faded floral print dress and a gray cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders, even though it wasn't cold inside. The moment I stepped in, her head snapped up, and a wave of what I can only describe as profound relief washed over her features. "Oh, thank heavens," she said, her voice thin and raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. She put a trembling hand to her chest. "You gave me a start, but I'm so glad to see you. I get so nervous out here all by myself at night." I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring nod. "No problem, ma'am. Just need to fill up the tanks." Of course," she said, her eyes, which were surprisingly sharp and clear in her wrinkled face, darting to the window and back to me. "It's just the silence, you know. It gets so loud out here when you're all alone." I understood that. I really did. The loneliness of the road is a character all its own. "I hear you," I said, pulling out my company card. "It's a long way between towns on this stretch." "Isn't it just?" she breathed, her eyes fixed on me. "A long, long way. You headed east or west, dear?" The question was normal enough. Gas station small talk, but the intensity in her gaze was a little off. "East," I said. "Got a load for the coast." "The coast," she repeated almost dreamily. "That's a good long drive, a real long drive. You must get awfully tired." "Part of the job," I shrugged. I tapped the card on the counter. "Can I prepay for, say, 200 on pump 1?" She didn't move to take the card. She just kept looking at me, her head tilted slightly. "Will you be stopping again soon, before you get to the city?" Okay, this was getting weird. Probably not. Just want to get as many miles in as I can before sunup. "So no one's really expecting you?" she asked, her voice dropping a little. "No one's waiting for you at a motel or anything like that. You're just out here, on your own." The way she said "on your own" sent a little shiver down my spine. It was a statement, an observation. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to lie, to tell her my wife was waiting on the phone, that my dispatcher was tracking my every move. But the words caught in my throat. I just wanted to get my fuel and go. "That's right," I said, my voice a little tighter than I intended. "Just me and the road, the pump, ma'am." She finally blinked. A slow, deliberate motion and a thin smile stretched her lips. "Of course, dear. My apologies. My mind wanders." She took the card and ran it through the ancient machine, her gnarled fingers moving with a slow, deliberate pace. As the machine was processing, the tinny bell above the door jingled again. I turned. A man had entered. He was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered, leathery skin you get from a life spent outdoors. He wore a dirty flannel shirt and worn-out jeans. He didn't look at me, just let his eyes roam over the empty shelves, a strange, hungry look on his face. He walked with a slight limp, his boots scuffing quietly on the linoleum floor. He ambled up to the counter, standing a few feet away from me, and leaned in towards the old woman. He still didn't acknowledge my presence. It was like I was a piece of furniture. "Anything come in?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. The old woman's smile tightened. She handed me my card back, but her eyes were on him. "Not yet," she said, her voice now carrying a different tone. It was businesslike, colder. "Still waiting." The man grunted, sniffing the air. "I'm getting hungry," he said, and turned his head, and his eyes, dark and flat as river stones, flickered over me for a fraction of a second. They were completely devoid of emotion. Then he looked back at the woman. "Any fresh meat?" My blood went cold. The phrase hung in the dusty air, thick and greasy. It had to be a joke, some kind of local slang. Maybe they sold deer jerky, or they were hunters. That had to be it. My tired brain was making connections that weren't there. The old woman didn't miss a beat. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod in my direction. My back was mostly to her, but I saw it in the reflection on the grimy cooler door. "There's fresh meat on the way," she said, her voice a low murmur. "Just be patient." The man grunted again, a sound of satisfaction this time, and turned and walked out. The bell jingled his departure. I stood there for a second, my heart hammering against my ribs. Fresh meat on the way, a trucker, headed east, no one expecting him, alone. "Your pump is all set, dear," the old woman said, her voice back to that frail, sweet tone. It was like she'd flipped a switch. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. "Thanks," I mumbled, turning and pushing the door open so hard the bell clanked against the glass. The night air felt good, but it didn't wash away the sudden, slimy feeling of dread that had coated my skin. I tried to shake it off. I was tired, overreacting. They were just weird locals with a weird sense of humor. I walked over to the pump, unscrewed the caps on my tanks, and grabbed the heavy diesel nozzle. As I stood there, the pump chugging away, my eyes scanned the darkness. My rig was the only vehicle in the front lot. But my senses were on high alert now, and I was noticing things my tired brain had initially filtered out. I let my gaze drift past the station, to the dark, gravel area behind it. And that's when I saw it. Tucked away in the shadows, almost perfectly hidden from the road, was a pickup truck. It was an old model, beat to hell, with a mismatched fender and a dull, rusted paint job. Its lights were off. It was just sitting there, silent and waiting. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized there was someone in the driver's seat, a silhouette against the slightly less black night sky. A prickle of unease turned into a full-blown alarm bell in my head. Why park back there? Why with no lights? Then, as I watched, another vehicle pulled in. It didn't come from the highway. It seemed to materialize from a dirt track that ran alongside the station. Another beat-up pickup, this one a dark blue, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. It coasted in just as silently as the first one, its engine a barely audible rumble before it was cut. It parked right next to the first one, also in the shadows, also with its lights off. Two men got out of that one, moving with a quiet purpose that was anything but casual. They didn't go into the station. They just leaned against their truck and waited, their faces obscured by the darkness. I felt like I was watching a scene from a movie I didn't want to be in. The pieces started clicking into place with a horrifying metallic certainty. The pump clicked off, the tank full. My hands were shaking as I hung up the nozzle and screwed the cap back on. My mind was racing. I had to get out of there. Now, I didn't even bother filling the second tank. To hell with the money. Every second I spent here felt like a lifetime borrowed on credit I didn't have. I practically jogged back to my cab, my boots crunching loud in the terrible silence. I kept my eyes on the station, expecting the someone to come back out or the guys from the pickups to start walking towards me. But nothing happened. Just as my hand reached the handle of my truck door, the station door opened. It was the old woman. She was holding a steaming styrofoam cup. "Oh dear, you forgot this," she called out, her voice carrying that same frail, grandmotherly tone. But it sounded grotesque to me now, a mask. She started walking towards me, one slow, shuffling step at a time. "I made a fresh pot of coffee. You looked so tired I thought you could use it. It's on the house. A little something to keep you awake on that long road." My entire body screamed no. Every instinct, every primal, self-preserving fiber of my being wanted me to get in the cab, lock the door, and lay on the horn until my hand broke. But I was frozen. If I refused, what then? Would they just drop the act? Would the men from the trucks come out of the shadows? The charade, however thin, felt like the only thing keeping me alive right now. Playing along might buy me a few precious seconds. She reached me, her hand trembling as she held out the cup. Or was it trembling? Looking closer, her hand was steady as a rock. It was the cup that was vibrating from the sloshing of the hot liquid. Her eyes, those piercingly clear eyes, were locked on mine. They weren't kind. They were expectant. "You take this," she insisted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It'll help you. You need to rest." I took the cup. Her skin was cold and dry as paper where her fingers brushed mine. "Thank you, ma'am," I managed to choke out. The words felt like ash in my mouth. "You're very welcome, dear," she said, that thin smile returning. "Drive safe now." She turned and shuffled back to the station, disappearing inside. I didn't wait to watch the door close. I scrambled up into my cab, slammed the door, and hit the locks. My heart was a wild bird beating against my ribs. I jammed the key in the ignition and the diesel engine roared to life, shattering the night's silence. The coffee cup sat in my cup holder, radiating a sickening, artificial warmth. I didn't dare spill it. I didn't dare throw it out the window. I just left it there, a symbol of how close I'd come. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of that godforsaken lot, my tires spitting gravel. I didn't look at the station in my side mirror. I looked at the mirror pointed towards the back of the station. As I rolled onto the highway, two pairs of headlights flicked on in the darkness behind the building. They pulled out after me, falling into formation about a quarter-mile back. They didn't speed up. They didn't flash their lights. They just followed. Two beat-up pickup trucks, the silent partners in this nightmare. My blood ran cold. This was it. The hunt was on. My foot pressed the accelerator to the floor. The rig groaned, slowly picking up speed. 60, 70, 80. I was pushing it far beyond the safe limit, the trailer swaying slightly behind me. But every time I looked in the mirror, the two sets of headlights were still there, maintaining their distance, two pairs of predatory eyes in the black. I grabbed my phone just as I suspected. No service. I was completely and utterly alone. The next few hours were the purest form of terror I have ever known. It wasn't a slasher movie jump scare kind of fear. It was a slow, grinding psychological horror. The road stretched on an endless black void. There were no other cars, no exits, no signs of civilization. Just me, my roaring engine, and the two sets of lights behind me. They were hurting me, I knew it. They were patient. They knew this stretch of road. They knew there was nowhere for me to go. They were just waiting, waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for my nerve to break. Or if their original plan had worked, waiting for the drugs and the coffee to kick in and do the job for them. I glanced at the cup still sitting there. I imagined myself getting drowsy, my eyelids feeling like lead, pulling over to the shoulder. I shook my head violently, forcing the image out. My mind raced through scenarios. What did they want? The truck? The cargo? No. The man's words echoed in my head. Fresh meat. It wasn't about my rig, it was about me. I thought about slamming on the brakes, trying to get them to crash into my trailer. But they were keeping their distance, and what if I just jackknifed the rig? I'd be a sitting duck, trapped in a wreck. I thought about trying to call them on the CB, but what would I say? And what if they answered? The thought of hearing one of their voices crackle over the radio was somehow more terrifying than the silence. So I just drove. I drove with my eyes glued to the road ahead and the mirror. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. My body was drenched in a cold sweat. Every shadow on the side of the road was a new threat, every bend a potential ambush. The hum of the engine was my only ally. As long as it was running, I was moving. As long as I was moving, I was alive. The night seemed to stretch into eternity. Time lost all meaning. There was only the road, the engine, the fear, and the lights. They never wavered, never got closer, never fell further behind. They were a constant, terrifying presence, a promise of what was waiting for me if I stopped. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible lightening of the sky on the eastern horizon. At first, I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. But it grew, a line of pale gray, then a soft, bruised purple. Dawn. I didn't let myself feel hope. It felt too much like a trap. But as the sun began to properly crest the horizon, painting the desolate landscape in shades of orange and pink, something happened. I looked in my mirror. The headlights behind me were gone. I scanned the road behind me, my heart in my throat. The two pickup trucks were still there, but they were falling back, rapidly. As the first rays of direct sunlight spilled over the plains and hit my windshield, I looked in the mirror one last time. The two trucks were making a sharp, synchronized U-turn in the middle of the empty highway and speeding off in the direction we'd come from. They were gone. Just like that, the sunlight had saved me. It was like they were creatures of the dark, unable or unwilling to operate in the light of day where they could be seen, identified. I drove for another 10 miles, my body shaking with adrenaline and relief before I finally pulled over. I killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was beautiful. It was the silence of survival. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, just breathing. My eyes fell on the styrofoam cup. With a convulsive, angry movement, I snatched it, rolled down the window, and hurled it out into the desert. I watched it tumble into a ditch, a tiny, harmless-looking piece of white trash that held a death sentence. I finished my haul. I delivered my load. I did it on autopilot, the terror of that night replaying in a constant loop in my head. I looked like hell, and my boss told me to take a few days off. The first thing I did was go to the state police barracks for the county where the station was. I sat in a sterile interrogation room and told my story to a weary-looking officer with a thick mustache. I told him everything. The station, the old woman, her questions, the man, the phrase, fresh meat, the trucks, the coffee, the chase. He wrote it all down, but the look on his face was one of polite, professional disbelief. "So," he said, tapping his pen on his notepad, "you're saying this gas station, which isn't on any of our maps, by the way, is a front for some kind of hunting party, and they chase truckers through the night." "I'm telling you what happened," I said, my voice tight. "That coffee was drugged. They were going to kill me. And you have this coffee." I threw it out. I was terrified. He sighed. Look, sir, you truckers drive long hours. The mind can play tricks on you when you're fatigued. I insisted. I gave him the mile marker where I thought it was. I described the turnoff. I told him he had to check it out. To his credit, and probably just to shut me up, he agreed to humor me. He said he'd take a drive out there when he had a chance. I knew that meant never, so I pushed. I told him I'd ride with him. I'd show him the exact spot. After a long argument, he reluctantly agreed, probably thinking it was the fastest way to prove me crazy. So the next day, I was in the passenger seat of his cruiser, driving back down that same dark stretch of highway, this time in the bright, unforgiving light of day. My stomach was in knots. It should be right up here, I said, my voice hoarse. Around this bend. We came around the bend, and there it was, the dirt turnoff, the cracked asphalt lot, the single-story building with the low, flat roof. See, I said, a wave of vindication washing over me. I told you. The officer didn't say anything. He just pulled the cruiser into the lot and put it in park. We both got out. The building was there, but it wasn't a gas station. It was a derelict, a shell. The windows were boarded up from the inside, thick with cobwebs and grime. The door was hanging off one hinge, held shut by a rusty padlock. The sign that had read as an AT was just a rusted metal frame, the plastic long gone. The pumps were there, but they were skeletal remains, their hoses rotted away, their metal casings pitted with rust and time. I walked over and looked at the dial. It was rusted solid. These things hadn't pumped a gallon of fuel in 30 years. This is it, the officer asked, his voice flat. I walked over to the building and peered through a crack in the boarded-up window. I expected to see the dusty shelves, the counter, the cooler. There was nothing. The inside was completely, totally empty. It was a single hollow room, bare floorboards, crumbling drywall, no counter, no shelves, no wiring for a cooler. There was a thick layer of dust on the floor that was completely undisturbed. No footprints, no sign that anyone had been inside for decades. It was a ghost, an empty stage. We checked the gravel lot behind the building. There were some old, faded tire tracks, but nothing fresh. Nothing to indicate two heavy pickup trucks had been sitting there just a few nights before. The officer looked at me. The polite disbelief was gone. Now it was just pity. "Let's go, son," he said gently. I couldn't speak. I just stood there staring at the hollow building, the empty pumps, the silent, sun-baked lot. It was real. I know it was. The woman, the coffee, the terror. But the evidence was gone, wiped clean by the light of day. It was a trap that materialized in the darkness and vanished with the dawn. A net cast for the lonely, the isolated, the ones no one would miss for a day or two. I don't know what they are. Ghouls, opportunists, something in between, but they're out there, and they have a system. They know the empty roads, the dead zones. They set up their stage and they wait. So this is my warning. To all of you who travel the lonely roads at night. If you're running on empty and you see a single, flickering light in the distance, a place that looks too good to be true, it probably is. Don't stop. I'm telling you, it is better to be stranded. It is better to run out of gas and wait for the sun. Because if you pull into that station and a frail old woman tells you how scared she is of being alone, you need to understand that you're the one who should be scared. You're the reason she's not alone anymore. You're the fresh meat, and the hunters are waiting just out of sight. Insanity. Text story. 911, where is your emergency? The operator asked. Help me, I shouted desperately. I'm AT. A skinless woman lunged over the table and swiped at me, knocking the phone from my hand and sending it flying through the air. Blood from her glistening body sprayed over my arm as I barely managed to avoid her clawing fingers. She was thrown off balance by my dodge and tripped over a chair, falling to the ground. I stumbled backwards towards the bar, staring in horror at my phone, which was now broken on the hardwood floor behind her. This is a nightmare. I had just been closing up the bar for the night, wiping down the tables, when suddenly the door crashed open and I was attacked by this blood-covered psychopath. I had barely managed to hold her off long enough to call 911. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I was shaking with adrenaline and scared out of my mind. Turning her skull toward me as she struggled to stand, pupils huge and wide, lidless eyes, she started giggling. "We are scared and be afraid of Hilitzakale show you," she chittered, her facial muscles pulling her mouth into a rictus grin. For a moment I was frozen. Her insanity struck as a physical force. This monster was going to tear me to shreds, laughing as she did it. She rose in jerking motions onto her bleeding legs. Snapping out of my paralysis, I turned, vaulted off a stool and over the bar top, landing behind the counter and twisting to face her. She was about 10 feet away and gaining speed when I threw a pint glass at her. It struck her chest and shattered. She didn't even flinch. A million glittering pieces hung in the air as she dove for me over the bar. I screamed, jumping aside at the last second. She hit the wall and liquor bottles began falling to the floor in a cacophony of rattling glass. She somehow landed on her feet, turned in one smooth motion and sprang at me, sending us both crashing to the ground. I frantically put my legs up to keep her raw, muscled arms away from my face. Rolling to my right, I managed to pin her left arm against the underside of the bar and desperately grabbed her slick right arm before her hand could reach my throat. She leaned forward, using all of her weight in an attempt to overpower me. Her muscles visibly rippled with exertion, coiling and uncoiling with every small movement. Blood dripped from her face onto mine as I fought a desperate struggle to match her frenzied strength. She grinned, laughing with hysterical, rapturous joy, weeping crimson tears as she pushed her fingers towards my neck. I stared into her lidless, bloodshot eyes and hell stared back. "Stop," I managed, before she pressed down harder. It was difficult to get any purchase on her bleeding muscles. "Lukai nth edu ran dual lsc ehelswisper swill lsc tio uffer e," she sang, as I used every bit of strength to hold her off. Her fingers were an inch from my throat. Sweat and her blood rolled down my face as madness and horror pressed in. This was the end. "Isawandi heard, Isawandi heard, Isawandi heard," she gibbered, her unblinking eyes getting closer. "Get," I grunted out, fighting for my life. She was so strong, impossibly strong. "I'm going to die." With a final burst of adrenaline and nothing left to lose, I released my left hand from her slick wrist. Blindly searching the ground, my fingers found the neck of a fallen bottle. "Off!" I screamed, and swung the whiskey bottle at her head with everything I had. She must have had some self-preservation left, because she turned her head to the side as the bottle struck her. The bottle fell from my numb fingers as she went limp. I kicked her off me and scrambled backwards across the floor. Groaning, I grabbed the bar top and pulled myself up and over it. I crawled to a table and used it to climb to my feet. My body was in agony, every aching muscle was on fire. I could hardly breathe, but I needed to escape. There was no stopping. I had to get away. Limping, I staggered forward. I had to make it out the door. It wasn't far, I could make it. I just needed to keep moving. I heard a quick series of wet plap, noises on the hardwood floor. Instinct saved me. I grabbed the closest chair and swung it in a blind arc as I spun around, screaming. She was running at me when the chair slammed into her legs. The sharp crack of breaking bone reached my ears as she fell forward. The impact knocked her off course, but her shoulders still caught me in the side. My feet were swept from the floor and I landed on my back hard. "No!" I screamed in fear as she dragged herself towards me in a frenzied burst of speed. Her broken leg left a red smear across the hardwood as she dragged it. Nothing would stop her from getting her hands on me. She giggled as I frantically pushed myself backwards, then suddenly opened her mouth and screamed at me louder than I've ever heard anyone scream. I'm inhilindi waswelland minhilindi waswelland. She was piercingly loud, and I lost my concentration. My hand slipped in blood that she had spilled earlier, and I dropped fully to the floor. On my back, I looked down at her. Her grin was wide as she closed in. I'm inhilindi waswellandamin. A-H-H-H-H-H-H-H. I screamed in utter terror as she suddenly lunged forward, reaching for me, her bloody fingers trembling in anticipation. I kicked out reflexively. With a hideous squelch, my shoe slammed into her face. A shock jolted up my leg. She collapsed to the ground, unmoving. Silence, my breath caught. Was she dead? A subtle rise of her chest. She was still breathing. I screamed. In a blind panic, I lurched to my feet and tripped over myself, desperate to escape before she woke up. Fear had taken over, and even as I finally made it through the front door and into the night, I couldn't stop screaming. I stumbled down the street outside the bar, crying out for help and covered in blood. Insanity, my shadow under the moon, chased me. Later, police entered the bar. The skinless woman had already bled out. It's been 2 months since then, and I'm still recovering. She visits me in my nightmares. Today, the police contacted me. With dental records, they'd made an identification. Laura, a librarian. She died in 1921. Family Feud. Text story. We've all heard of the dark web, right? If you're here, reading this, chances are you've probably already heard dozens of chilling tales from the internet's darkest corners. I'm no different. Those stories kept me away from the dark web for as long as I let them frighten me. However, all people grow curious, correct? Curiosity is one of those emotions that can overshadow fear frequently. For me, this happened one weekend whilst my parents were out of town. I had the whole house to myself, while the two of them went on a romantic getaway near the city. Being left alone in silence after becoming so accustomed to the chitter-chatter of my regular household left my mind to wander a bit. I'd recently gotten a new PC for my birthday, and instead of browsing porn like a normal teenage boy would do after finding himself home alone, I chose to delve a bit into what makes the internet, you know. I'd learned from the stories I'd heard that the dark web was for stuff not meant for casual viewing, if you catch my drift, and I had no intention of seeing anything that would be permanently seared into my memory. That being said, I decided to play it carefully. After installing the Tor browser, I decided to take it a step further with incognito browsing. In hindsight, this probably did nothing to protect me, but hey, that's why it's called hindsight, right? Honestly, discovering the supposed secret and disturbing side of the internet was easier than it should be. Seriously, you'd think that some sort of federal agency would have made this impossible by now. Anyway, once I finally found myself within the realm of the macabre, I was immediately flashbanged by pop-up after pop-up that I was certain were going to absolutely torch my new PC. Enabling ad blockers helped a bit. However, a lot of them had to be manually closed, which I'm sure was by design. Once I got rid of all the boner pills and chatbots, what lay hidden beneath the advertisements was an extensive list of links, all ending in onion. I meticulously scanned each of them, praying I didn't accidentally open something that would 100% have me arrested. I came across some drug links, weapons for sale, and an absolutely abysmal amount of Hitler propaganda and Nazi sympathizer chatrooms. Seriously, you'd be shocked at how many of those people there are still left in the world. However, that's not what held my attention. No, what held my attention was a link simply titled Family Feud. Clicking the link, I was brought to live footage of what I assumed was a game show. The set was crudely lit by fluorescent stage lights, and the cement stage was covered in these sort of mysterious stains. On each side of the stage, Two groups of contestants sat bound and gagged, with their faces beaten to bloodied pulps. I soon came to the realization that these weren't regular contestants. Each group looked too similar. That's when the name hit me. Family Feud. I recoiled at the realization of what I was seeing, yet I could not take my eyes off the screen. Suddenly, while the contestants groaned in pain between their muffled screams, off-screen speakers began to blare the Family Feud theme music as a man waltzed to the center of the stage. He was a fat Caucasian man, stripped down to his underwear, and he wore a leather mask to cover his face. You know those bondage masks with zippers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with all the charm in the world, "welcome back to Family Feud. I'm your host, Steve Hardy." As if to emphasize the joke, the man in the gimp mask thrusted his pelvis forward as he motioned to camera to zoom in on his penis imprint. Tonight we have two very special families, as always. To my right, we have the ever-so-beautiful McLeans. The camera cut to the McLean family, a mother, father, and two teenage sons. They each looked on in horrified anticipation of what kind of torturous game was in store for them. "Aw, cheer up, guys," the host pouted. "It's just a game show, you'll live or not." He punctuated this statement with a maniacal laugh that almost seemed cartoonish in nature, as though he were playing it up for the cameras. He then moved across the stage, where he introduced the second family as the Bryants. They, too, consisted of two parents and two children. However, these parents had daughters rather than sons. One of the daughters started pleading through her gag. The host stepped toward her swiftly before asking, "What's your name, little girl?" and shoving his microphone in her face. A man in a ski mask swooped in from off stage and quickly removed her gag. "Please, please let us go. Please, I promise we won't tell anyone," the girl begged. Her family began shouting in muffled spurts from behind their gags, urging the host to consider. The man leaned forward charismatically before whispering in a voice like syrup, "Promise." The girl screamed in agreement, assuring her captor that she would not tell a soul of what had happened. The host seemed to ponder her response for a moment, stroking his chin with long, exaggerated strokes. "I'll tell you what, since you're so pretty, I'll make you an offer." The girl squeezed her eyes shut, and fresh tears began to stream down her face as she nodded in agreement. "You play my game and win, I'll let you go, no questions asked." It was at this moment that I realized just how mesmerized I was by what was unfolding before my eyes. I knew what I was seeing was terrible, so much so that I could feel bile rising in my stomach with each passing moment. But morbid curiosity forced my eyes to remain glued to the screen. The girl's eyes opened again, and they were now filled with that primal human will to keep living. She nodded her head ferociously at the man's offer. "Phenomenal," the man replied with a smirk. "Well then, let's get you all situated, shall we?" The man with a ski mask stepped back on stage and began untying the family while holding them at gunpoint. One by one, he forced them to the center of the stage and had them kneel in a circle while the host continued to address the audience. "As we prepare for the first round," he purred, "we here on Family Feud would like to remind our viewers to place your bets now. All bets are final, and refusal to comply will result in immediate termination from future viewership. Now, without further ado, let the first round of tonight's episode commence." He announced this while throwing his hands in the air in celebration. What bothered me the most, however, wasn't the deranged man acting a fool on stage. It was what I could hear the family whispering amongst themselves. Scattered "I love yous" and promises that "we're gonna get out of this." It was heartbreaking. While the host meandered off stage, the lights dimmed, and I was left with nothing but a dark screen, with only whispers cutting through the silence. I saw my reflection in the screen and couldn't help but feel ashamed. I felt dirty for witnessing what I was witnessing. A wave of conviction washed over me, and my left index finger hovered over the escape key. I was just about to press it when the screen lit up again, and the Bryants were now standing in a circle and stripped down to their undergarments. If they looked devastated before, they looked like they'd actually welcomed death now. Their eyes were all cemented onto the floor as the host spoke up from off stage. "Remember our deal, girlie. You want to go home, do ya?" The daughter nodded lifelessly, and the host spoke again. "Good, fantastic. Now, it's not called Family Feud for no reason. What were you all standing around for? Fight, kill each other." For a moment, nobody moved. His words stabbed me in the chest. I could only imagine how the Bryants must have been feeling. The awkward and terrified tension in the air was broken when one of the masked guards fired a shot directly into one of the McLean boys. I know what fake gore looks like. That wasn't fake gore. The way his brains just flew out of the wound. The way his body seized as his eyes rolled back in his skull. I vomited into the trash can by my desk. I said, "Fight." The McLeans began to wail with grief at the sight of their son. His brother stared down at his lifeless body, trembling. "He's okay, he's okay, he's okay." He just kept repeating those three words, forcing his traumatized brain to rationalize what it had just witnessed. "Fight, damn it," the host screeched. Mrs. Bryant threw the first terrified punch, landing a sickening blow to the back of her husband's head while apologizing profusely. The husband fell to the floor, sobbing. Mrs. Bryant sobbed too, along with their children. "Did I tell any of you to stop?" the host shouted from off stage. "I guess you don't want to go home, little girl." Through tears, the girl screamed a war cry and socked her sister in the face. She didn't stop screaming. She didn't stop punching. She wailed on her sister's face over and over while crying a loud, ugly cry. The sister tried to fight back, but the girl's will was too strong. As her sister attempted to break her guard, the girl grabbed her arms and snapped them backwards, almost animalistically. What followed was the most deafening screech of pain I had ever heard as the sister keeled over, rolling back and forth, grasping her broken arm and sobbing. Mrs. Bryant tried to stop the girl. She grabbed her shoulders and attempted to pull her away from her sister, but her attempts proved fruitless. "Ashley," Mrs. Bryant screamed. "You are better than this. Please, please, my sweet girl, your sister was your best friend." This caused Ashley to stop for a moment. "Drama," the host called from off stage. "Ignore him, Ashley," Mrs. Bryant bargained in a softer, more parental voice. "He will not turn me against you. You are my daughter. I will love you to my dying breath. If it's caused by him, so be it. But please don't make your own mother witness you killing your baby sister." Ashley's shoulders bounced up and down as she cried. She turned towards her mother, raw devastation painted across her face. Mrs. Bryant extended her hands to Ashley, who took them within her own while she and her mother fell to their knees and pushed their heads together in solemn embrace. "He can do whatever he wants to us, Ashley, but we can't stoop to his lev." Mrs. Bryant was cut off when another round pierced her skull. Ashley gasped, horrified and shocked as her mother fell to the ground before her. "Geez Louise, can't we have just one episode where the contestants actually listen rather than try and band together? Ashley, your mom's dead. Kill your sister." The host's voice was cold and annoyed. I could sense that his patience was running thin, and I think Ashley could too. "Please," she screamed. "Just stop, just fucking stop. I'm not doing it. You won't fucking make me." The girl fell to her knees and cried into her hands. For a moment, nothing happened. However, eventually, the host spoke again. "Well, well, well," he gleamed. "Isn't this an interesting turn of events?" Ashley raised her head from her hands, confused. Before she could question anything, her father's hands snaked around her face, and he twisted forcefully. Ashley's neck snapped, and the sound echoed across the stage, followed by cheers from the host and screams from his final daughter. She squirmed around on the ground, injured from her fight with Ashley. She attempted to crawl away, but her father grabbed her leg and pulled her back. I'm so sorry, Bianca. I don't know why this is happening. But I do know one thing. He's not going to let us leave, no matter what he says. And I will not let him have the satisfaction of killing you. With one final "I love you," Mr. Bryant brought his foot down onto his daughter's head, leading to a disgusting, dull crunching sound. I screamed at the screen. The sight caused my heart to stop, and it felt like all time had ceased, and I was stuck in an eternal loop of depravity. The host's voice cut through again. "Congratulations, Mr. Bryant. You have successfully managed to be the last one standing. Now, by rules of the game, I suppose you get to advance to the next round, even if you had a little help with your wife." Mr. Bryant responded with a crisp and satisfying, "Fuck you," as he spit blood onto the ground. "Oh, well, I love you too, sweetie pie. Hey, here's the good news. Maybe I can be your new wife. How does that sound?" Mr. Bryant didn't respond. He stood there, eyes burning into the host with boiling rage and hatred. "Now, we do have to let this next family duke it out first, but don't worry. The guards will make sure you're nice and safe backstage. Wouldn't want the carnage messing with your focus, you know." The man was so damningly charismatic. A true character. The voice of every game show host ever, but the personality of a literal demon. The stage lights went dim again, and I could hear the McLeans sob louder and louder as they too were stripped of their clothing. I'd finally had enough of this sadistic game show, and decided that it was time to end my crusade. It's not like the stories. I was able to exit the tab just fine. Once I did, I cleansed my entire PC, scrubbing it clean of the unholy filth that it had just been used to access. Once that was done, I hard-powered the computer off and decided to take a shower. Emotions manifesting as action, I suppose. Whilst in the shower, I heard pounding coming from my front door. Assuming my parents had come home early, I cut my shower short, grabbed a towel to cover myself, and marched downstairs to open the door. Before I had the chance, however, the door burst open, splintering at its hinges, and two armed SWAT guards tackled me to the ground, while the rest of the team stepped over me to search my house. Once the guards had slapped their cuffs on me, I was placed in the back of one of their unmarked vehicles and expected to be quickly whisked away. See, I thought I was going to jail. However, instead, one of the guards threw the back door of the car open and, without warning, stuck a syringe in my neck. I fought against it as best I could, but expectantly, my vision began to swim and eventually went black entirely. When I awoke, I found myself tied to a chair. I was completely nude, and my wrists hurt badly from the restraints. I struggled to fully come to, but once I did, I realized something that horrified me. Beside me, both bound and gagged, were my parents, both unconscious. I tried to scream, tried to get their attention, but the gag muffled the noise, and they both remained unconscious while I struggled in vain to wake them. I cried, I wept even. I knew exactly what was happening, yet had no power to stop it. I gave one last, muffled cry, begging God to let them wake up, and just as the sound escaped my lips, the cement stage lit up, and a man in a leather gimp mask stepped directly to the center. The worth of a life. Text story. What would it take for you to kill a man? "Excuse me," I asked, taken off guard. A stranger in an expensive-looking suit sat across from me at the bus stop. "What would it take for you to kill a man?" he repeated. "Why are you asking me this?" I asked, increasingly unsettled. He leaned back against the bench casually, as if he were simply asking for the time. "Because I want to know, David," he said, his face expressionless. "How do you know my name?" I asked, a chill running through me. This was getting creepy. "Who are you?" The stranger leaned forward and looked me in the eye. His stare was cold and unwavering. "I know everything about you, David," he said, not offering his own name. "I know that you are drowning in student loans, that you had to sell your car, that you live from one meager paycheck to the next." He leaned back and looked away. "I want to know what it would take for you to kill a man," he finished. This guy was seriously freaking me out, and I wanted to run or call the police. But I was afraid of what he might do. He was obviously some kind of psychopath. I decided to humor him carefully until the bus came, just in case. "Why would I ever kill someone?" I asked. "Aside from self-defense, I don't see how that could ever be worth it." "You have a gun and someone is kneeling in front of you," he said. "What if pulling the trigger would save 1,000,000 lives? Would you do it?" A psychopathic philosopher. "So, the trolley problem?" I asked cautiously. "Switching the tracks to save 1,000,000 people by sacrificing one." The stranger waved a dismissive hand. "You could think about it that way," he said, "but it doesn't necessarily have to be 1,000,000 people. It could be for anything. Power, money, even the cure for cancer." I'd never liked the trolley problem. It was always an impossible choice for me. "I wouldn't be able to decide," I said, shrugging. "Luckily, I'll never have to." He leaned forward again. "But what if you do?" he said. "What if I have the power to make it happen?" This guy is insane, I thought. "You have the power?" I asked, exasperated. "If so, why not do it yourself? Why would you make a random person kill someone to cure cancer?" "I can't do it myself," he replied. "I'm unable to directly interfere. I can only act when someone of their own free will and by their own hand provides me with a soul to do so." I leaned back and crossed my arms. "Prove it," I said. "Prove that you have the power to do this." "Like I said, I'm unable to act," he said. "However, I can tell you that when you were 10 years old, you found a frog in a secluded field. You named him Jim. You would return weekly to see him until one day he was no longer there. You had a crush on Jenny in high school," he continued. "You still think about her. You want to call her but keep putting it off. You're planning to visit your brother's grave tomorrow," he said. 2 days ago, a conversation with a coworker reminded you of him. You were going to buy flowers later today from the florist on 7th Avenue. "Is this satisfactory?" the stranger asked. I sat there frozen in shock. I had never told anyone about any of that, ever. No one knew but me. It was impossible. Undeniable proof was staring me in the face. There was no other way he could have known. It took me a moment to find my voice. "Okay," I said shakily, "so you need me to kill someone. Kill one person to save others." "What you kill for is up to you," he said. "You can receive anything you wish." The stranger stood up. "You have 20 minutes to decide," he said, looking down at me. "You will never have this opportunity again. Think carefully." He turned and pointed. "In that alley where I am pointing," he said, "you will find a man." I turned to look at the alley. It was right next to the bus stop. He continued, "You will also find a gun. State your desire loudly and clearly before pulling the trigger." He lowered his hand and turned to leave. "Decide what you would kill for. Decide the worth of a life." The stranger started walking away. "Remember 20 minutes," he said, his voice fatting. "Will you pull the trigger?" I looked at my watch, then slumped back on the bench, overwhelmed. What should I do, I thought. Was there actually a man in that alley? A man who would live or die depending on my decision? What is the worth of a life? Was it more lives? I could save the unsavable, cure the incurable, find the cure for cancer, fix climate change, discover the secret to immortality, a world without suffering, just one life lost to save countless others. What about money? I could be rich, never work another day in my life, debt erased, no longer struggling, barely making enough to survive, a life of unparalleled luxury for one pull of the trigger. Power. I could rule nations, change the course of history. Every law, every war, every scientific pursuit guided by my hand. No one could stop me. Unmatched potential achieved by removing another's. My thoughts were racing. What about the person I would kill? Did they have a family, friends? Were they like me with their own hopes and dreams? Their entire life gone with one bullet. It would be my fault. It would be my decision that they should die. Their innocent blood would be on my hands forever. 15 minutes had passed. Do the ends justify the means? Should I kill them? Or do the means justify the ends? Should I let them live? I kept looking at the alley. I had never been so stressed in my entire life. I could barely think. I had to decide. I had to decide now. I jumped up and started walking toward the alley. There was no choice. I had to do this. The world would be a better place in exchange for one single life. My steps carried me closer. It had to be done. I would make sure they were remembered forever as a hero, someone who saved the world. Just do it, keep walking. My heart was aching, tearing itself apart. Get there, pull the trigger. My legs were so heavy. End a life. I struggled to keep moving. I was almost there. I have to. 10 feet from the alley, my legs gave out. I fell to my knees. Tears rolled down my face. I couldn't breathe. I looked down at my hands. They were blurry, shaking uncontrollably. It was too much. I can't do it, I whispered, sobbing. I can't do it. I couldn't kill someone innocent, for a world they would never see. My decision was made. I would not pull the trigger. Trying to control my trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and called the police. It was clear to me now, it couldn't be measured. The worth of a life. Soon after, the police arrived. They couldn't find the stranger I had been talking to. They did, however, find someone in the alley. Someone holding a gun, waiting for me. My girlfriend's family isn't human. Text story. James first noticed her on a Wednesday afternoon, when the light through the high windows of the cafe was slanted, and golden, dust motes drifting in the beams like tiny dancers. He'd arrived early that day, hopping to claim the small corner table by the window for his music theory workbook and a large black coffee. The cafe was a comfortable jumble of mismatched chairs and tables, a gentle hum of conversation punctuated by the hiss of the espresso machine. As he stood in line, waiting for his drink, he saw her at the counter. Dark hair fell in loose waves just past her shoulders, catching the light in chestnut highlights. A pencil was tucked behind one ear, and she wore a moss-green trench coat that seemed improbably elegant for this corner of town. A coat that looked as if it were designed by a meticulous tailor, every seam purposeful, every fold intentional. He wondered what business someone so sharply dressed had in a bohemian coffee shop where most patrons wore paint-splattered jeans and flannel shirts. She turned, perhaps in response to the barista's question, and their eyes met. Her smile was crisp and immediate, as though she'd been ready to greet him all along. It was the sort of smile that could have been rehearsed, perfectly timed, flawlessly executed. But it also carried a soft warmth at the edges, like the flicker of a candle in a draft. He caught himself staring and looked away, heart suddenly pounding, but not before he noted the slow, deliberate way she stirred her latte, as if she were counting the rotations of the spoon, the way each swirl added a fraction of sweetness to the bitter coffee. Carrying his own drink back to the table, he set his heavy textbook down and tried to open it to the study on Schenkerian analysis. The densely packed notation and commentary felt hostile, the tiny symbols arranged in a code that he struggled to decipher. Across the room, out of the corners of his eyes, he could still see her. She'd chosen a small round table by the pastry display, stood there for a moment, one foot slightly in front of the other, favoring her right leg as if it bore a secret weight. She peered at the croissants and danishes with an appraising gaze, but didn't purchase anything. Just sipped her coffee, black, no sugar, eyes moving over the glass case with a quiet intensity. Once seated, she placed her phone, wallet, and green notebook on the tabletop, aligning them in a perfect row, as though about to perform delicate surgery. She opened the notebook and began to write, flipping pages with swift precision, a motion so brisk it reminded him of a librarian shelving books by the minute. He tried to concentrate on his personal studies, scanning over phrases like tonal prolongation and voice-leading reductions. But her presence at the far end of the cafe short-circuited his focus. The scratch of her pencil on paper, the almost inaudible rhythm of her writing, was more mesmerizing than any melody he'd ever studied. When he came back on Thursday at precisely the same time, he told himself she wouldn't notice him. He parked at the same table, opened the same chapter, and settled into the same spiral of frustration and caffeine. But his resolve crumbled in moments when his eyes drifted across the room. She was there again, same trench coat, same posture, same methodical preparation of her workspace. He counted the number of pages she turned, 14. He noted the tilt of her head as she worked, 6 degrees off vertical. He observed the way she took a sip of coffee when she reached the conclusion of a page, pausing for perhaps 3 seconds before returning to her notes. He felt almost absurd, as though he were stalking her through algorithms and measurements. On Friday, he almost didn't come. He told himself it was ridiculous to study at the same cafe every day, that the routine was too predictable, that she might feel spied upon. But by noon he found himself pushing open the door, inhaling the familiar scent of roasted beans, and making a beeline for his table. As he settled in, his hands trembled just slightly as he opened his book, and for a moment he considered closing it and simply leaving. But then he noticed her beyond the counter, the slight crease in her brow as she jotted notes at top speed, and he was anchored. It was the third afternoon in a week that he'd seen her there when she rose from her chair and began walking toward him. His heart seized in his chest because he was certain she had not, until that moment, deigned to look at him directly. She carried her latte in one hand, her notebook in the other, her composure immaculate. She paused at his table without hesitation, as if she belonged there, as if she'd been plotting this encounter since Monday. Her eyes flicked to the empty chair across from him and then to his face, wholly unblinking. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, gesturing at the chair. Her voice was calm, unhurried, but there was a sparkle of amusement in her tone, as if she already knew the answer. He glanced down at his unremarkable shirt, the slight coffee ring he'd just uncovered on the tabletop, the stubby pencil in his backpack, and felt a rush of self-consciousness. "Go ahead," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She slid into the chair and set her notebooks in place once more. Up close, her eyes were the exact shade of her coat, deep moss green flecked with warm brown. Her beauty was striking in a classical way. A Roman nose, high cheekbones that cast delicate shadows, lips that seemed sculpted to rest in a thoughtful line when she wasn't smiling. Yet there was a restless energy about her, a barely contained fervor that made her seem less like a film star from the silent era, and more like someone on the brink of revelation. "I'm Mary," she said, extending a hand across the table. Her nails were short, practical, but her fingers were long and tapered, surprisingly elegant. He stood and shook her hand, caught off guard by its firm grip. "James," he replied, "nice to meet you." She held his hand for a moment longer than necessary, then released it and placed her notebook between them. She leaned forward, elbows lightly resting on the edge of the table. "I've seen you here a few times." He tried to appear nonchalant, but he could feel his face warming. "Yeah, I come here to study on my own time." He tucked a stray lock of hair behind his ear. "But honestly, I don't remember seeing you before." Her smile widened, a quick curve of her lips that suggested she found his discomfort amusing. "I would have remembered you," she said simply. Then she flipped open her notebook and began to read, eyes scanning the page. Embarrassment washed over him, and he tried to look back at his book, but the text was now a blur. The scratch of her pencil as she annotated her page was oddly hypnotic. She paused occasionally to chew the end of her eraser, her brow furrowing in concentration. At last, she snapped the notebook shut and looked up with an intensity that startled him. "Do you always read music theory in public?" she asked. James blinked. "How did you?" She tapped the spine of his open textbook, which he'd subconsciously tried to hide with his hand. "You were air conducting measures 8 through 12, she said, "and humming very softly under your breath." He laughed, a short, startled sound. "I didn't even realize." She leaned back, crossing one leg over the other gracefully. "It's endearing," she said. Her tone was gentle, teasing, and he felt a rush of relief and pleasure. "Makes you look absorbed." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Sorry, I guess I got carried away." "That's fine," she said. "Tell me something about yourself, James." He hesitated, surprised by the directness of her question. "Like what?" Her head tilted to one side as if appraising him from every possible angle. "Anything. Where are you from? Why music theory? What's your least favorite chord progression?" He snorted, running a hand through his hair. "Least favorite chord progression. That's a new one. Let's see. I'd say a plagal cadence in the middle of a sonata. It feels like a stuck elevator. I just study music for myself during free time. It's relaxing. It's not that serious." She laughed, smooth and clear. "A stuck elevator," she repeated, jotting down the phrase in her notebook. She paused, looking up at him, her eyes alight. "Tell me more." So he did. He told her about growing up in a small Midwestern town where the only music beyond church choir was the radio. He spoke of his first encounter with Bach in the public library's dusty record section. He described his fascination with patterns in sound, harmonic overtones, and the secret logic of tonal relationships. As he talked, she sketched little diagrams in the margin of her notebook, arrows, circles, a tiny cartoon face each time he made a joke. He found himself talking faster, exhaling tension he hadn't known he carried. When he finally paused, breathless, Mary looked at him as though she were tasting his words, weighing them. "That's fascinating," she said. "You should be teaching this." He waved a hand. "I'm not that good." "Humility," she nodded approvingly, then tapped her pencil twice against the tabletop. "But what about your actual background? Family? Siblings?" He cleared his throat. "I'm an only child," he said. "Parents still live back home. I haven't been to see them in a while." "Why that?" She sounded genuinely curious. "Busy," he shrugged, though it felt inadequate. "I just finished school work. I guess I'm avoiding the road trip." She wrote down aversion to road trips in her notebook and looked at him with a smile. "I see." They talked for another half hour, about favorite composers, worst practice sessions, the kind of music that makes your teeth ache when it's too loud. When his phone buzzed with a reminder for his part-time job shift, he realized they'd been talking for nearly an hour. She glanced at her watch and closed her notebook with a decisive snap. "Well," she said, standing, "I'll see you around." He managed a nod, too dazzled to find his voice. She gathered her things and walked away, leaving him with his open textbook, which suddenly looked like a door to a world he no longer found intimidating. The next day he arrived at the cafe well before noon, desperate to reserve the table where they'd spoken. He saw her already there, her thermos of homemade chai steaming beside her notebook. She looked up, caught his eye, and held out a small cup toward him. "Chai?" she asked. He blinked. "You made this." "Early morning project," she said with a smile, as though making chai were as routine as tying her shoes. "Thought you might like a change from coffee." He accepted the cup, inhaling the spicy aroma of cardamom and cinnamon. "I do," he said, sipping carefully. "It's perfect." She watched him for a moment, then turned back to her notebook. He settled into his chair, opened his book, and was halfway through a Roman numeral analysis when she leaned over and whispered, "Try this instead." She tapped his page where he'd misidentified a dominant preparation. She didn't scold. She simply guided his pencil to the correct spot, drawing a small star above the chord. Her fingertips brushed his hand in the process, and heat bloomed on his skin. They met in the same way the next day and the next. Each time she asked questions, sometimes about music, sometimes about his life outside the cafe, and transcribed his answers. He began to look forward to her arrival more than the music theory itself. She had an uncanny sense of his schedule, knowing exactly when he needed a sugar boost or a distraction. She'd produce a flaky almond croissant or a dark chocolate square right at the moment he was about to sigh in defeat over his homework. Yet for all her attentiveness, she herself remained a mystery. When James tried to learn more about her, she skated around details. She said she was from the East Coast but never specified a state. She mentioned project work that involved travel and deadlines but never elaborated. Occasionally, she'd talk about her young son, but only in fleeting references. A photograph she slipped from her wallet, a half-smile when she mentioned his laughter. She described him as though he were both her greatest joy and an enigma, and James found himself aching to know more but hesitant to push. For weeks, James's dreams clattered with imagery. Mary walking through endless corridors, Mary peeling off a mask only to reveal another, Mary singing songs in languages he didn't know. He woke to the memory of her hands on his skin, her voice in his ear, and always that sense of standing on a threshold. He wanted to know her, and sometimes he convinced himself that he already did. But the current of uncertainty, the suspicion of an inner sanctum untouched by his presence, never fully faded. Then on a breezy Thursday evening, Mary rang his phone. He just settled onto the threadbare couch in his tiny living room, the light of a single lamp casting long shadows against the peeling wallpaper. When he answered, her voice came softly, almost abruptly. "I'd like you to meet my family." It landed in his ear as though it were a casual remark. No build-up, no preamble, no sense of occasion. Just those 7 words, matter of fact and unadorned. He paused, thumb hovering over the end call button. "Meet your family," he repeated, voice level but surprised. "Is there some special reason?" She laughed quietly, a sound that carried a trace of warmth. "Not at all," she said. "My son's home from school early and I think you'd get along. He's really open-minded." Then, almost as an afterthought, "You can meet my uncle and grandfather, too. They're a little eccentric, but you'll see they're harmless." He felt the weight of the invitation settle over him. He and Mary had been seeing each other for several weeks. Dinners at hole-in-the-wall diners, long walks in the park where she'd talk about her childhood in veiled terms, coffee dates that slipped into twilight. But a family meeting felt like a milestone he hadn't anticipated. Still, he agreed. You don't refuse an invitation like that, and he heard her relief in the soft exhale on the other end. They set the time, 6:30 p.m. Friday. When Friday evening rolled around, he dressed carefully, dark slacks, a button-down shirt, shoes polished just enough to shine under the overhead light. He checked his reflection in the hallway mirror, fidgeted with his collar, then waited by the door. At exactly 6:15, Mary pulled up in her hatchback, the engine humming quietly. She wore a navy windbreaker and her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. She popped the door open with a wide grin. "Hop in," she said. He slid into the passenger seat. The interior was immaculate, as if she'd wiped every surface with disinfectant moments before. The dashboard gleamed, the upholstery looked untouched, and not a single fingerprint marred the center console. She buckled her seat belt and offered him one. "Buckle up," she teased. "It's only a short drive." As Mary steered the car through the city streets, he watched her profile in the side window. The curve of her nose, the way her brow furrowed slightly when she focused on the road, the subtle glow of the streetlights reflecting in her eyes. She talked about her son discreetly, always referring to him as the kid. She described him in broad strokes. Curious about history, loves building model airplanes, can't get enough of jazz records. James noticed that she kept changing the things he was into and specific details about him. She never used his name. He tried to press her, but she said she'd tell him at dinner. Then she dropped another fragment of her past. Her mother had died when she was young, and afterward her uncle and grandfather stepped in. They raised me, she said, voice a shade colder, in their own way. He listened, leaning back in his seat, eyes flicking to the passing storefronts. He realized she spoke of that time almost clinically. No emotions attached, just facts arranged like set pieces. As she piloted them out of the downtown grid and onto quieter suburban avenues, the streetlights thinned and the air took on a scent of freshly mown lawns and distant barbecue smoke. They came to rest in front of a squat, single-story house at the far edge of a cul-de-sac. The neighborhood was still. No voices, no cars, only the faint chirp of crickets. The front lawn had been mowed in impossibly straight lines, each stripe alternating between emerald and lime, as though the grass itself participated in some secret code. A single porch light flickered, casting an amber glow across the painted wooden steps. Mary parked, turned off the ignition, and sat for a moment. She reached over and gave his hand a quick squeeze, hard enough to be felt, brief enough to be cryptic. He swallowed, climbed out, and followed her up the porch steps. Inside, the first thing that struck him was the sound. Deep, rolling laughter, punctuated by occasional whoops, echoing from somewhere down a long hallway. The walls seemed to shimmer with it, as though the house itself were alive. The second thing was the decor. From floor to ceiling, the narrow foyer was plastered with collages of magazine clippings, faces from decades of television and pop culture. There was Lucille Ball doing her trademark double take. There was Rowan and Martin's gang of laugh-in comic rebels. There were the beaming visages of late-night hosts, frozen in mid-grin behind mustaches and suspenders. The effect was dizzying, a hall of mirrors, minus the glass. He stepped gingerly over a patterned runner rug and into the living room, which looked more like a museum exhibit than a home. Shelves groaned under the weight of VHS tapes, their spines bearing titles that ranged from Mary Tyler Moore to The Cosby Show. In one corner, a stack of old TV guide issues was meticulously arranged by year, as if someone expected a time traveler to drop by and ask for the premiere date of I Dream of Jeannie. A knitted afghan with technicolor stripes was draped over a well-worn sofa, the bright yarn still vivid against the muted upholstery. The room smelled faintly of popcorn and dust and something else, nostalgia for times you never lived through. In the far corner, under a small tube-style television perched on a rickety stand, sat a man hunched in an armchair. He wore a faded denim jacket, suspenders that had frayed edges, and a battered felt hat that looked like it had seen 20 summers. On the screen, the Beverly Hillbillies played in all its canned laughter glory, and the old man laughed along in perfect sync, deep laughter that shook his shoulders each time the pre-recorded guffaws played. He slapped his knee and barked. By golly, that's a good one, so loud it nearly drowned out the track. Mary cleared her throat. The old man waved a hand at them without turning his head. His voice rang out in a drawl that could have been lifted straight from the Ozarks. Don't mind me, folks, just watchin' my stories. James took a careful step forward, offering his hand. The old man finally swiveled his head, silver hair shining under the lamp, and fixed him with a bright, curious stare. Name Joe, the old man announced, standing up so quickly that the chair groaned in protest. You hungry, son? He pointed toward an open doorway that led to a kitchen, where the smell of roasting meat drifted out. James gave Mary a quizzical look. Mary managed a small smile. That, she said softly, is my grandfather. He tried to keep his tone light as he replied. It's very nice to meet you, name's James. But the old man didn't drop the character. He tipped his hat and winked. Pleased to meet you too, he said. Then he lowered his voice conspiratorially. Have you ever tried cornbread with honey butter? I reckon I can fix you up right. As Mary guided James deeper into the living room, past a glass display case full of battered black and white photographs of unrecognizable actors, he realized something curious. Joe's eyes, though twinkling and jovial, were sharp. They were eyes accustomed to reading people, measuring them, placing them on some private scale. James wondered briefly whether Joe was playing a part or simply refused to break character. Was it dementia, a lifelong performance, or a conscious choice to live permanently in the world of his favorite shows? Then Mary steered him toward the dining room. There, a middle-aged man in a wide-lapelled suit sat at the table with his hands tented under his chin. He had perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that radiated yellow charisma. When James entered, the man leaned forward and said, "Top 5 answers on the board. What brings you here tonight?" There was a pause, then uproarious self-laughter. This, evidently, was the uncle. He introduced himself as Richard, and the handshake that followed felt like a game show challenge. Richard's every movement, every turn of phrase, seemed lifted from Family Feud reruns. When James hesitated to answer a question, the uncle would pound the table and shout, "Survey says," as if an invisible crowd were keeping score. James tried to laugh it off, but as the dinner unfolded, he became increasingly aware of the collages on the walls. Everywhere, television faces, pasted together in surreal, overlapping mosaics. There were mashups of cartoon characters with news anchors. There were eyes cut from one actor and glued onto the face of another. It was an unnerving, obsessive display. The more James noticed, the more he realized that the entire house was curated to resemble a set, a simulation of family life as broadcast to the world, complete with a sizzle reel of canned laughter and familiar punchlines. That was the moment when, through a jitter of nerves and cheap wine, James remembered the questions Mary had been peppering him with since their first night together. What was the best sitcom episode of all time? What television moment, if any, had genuinely made him weep? Had he ever, growing up, imagined himself as another person for days at a time, inhabiting not only their voice but their gestures, their appetites, their secret hopes? It had seemed a harmless quirk at first, this 20 questions game, but now the memory of it snagged at him like an unfinished thread. He remembered how, lying together in the sweaty hush after sex, Mary would go suddenly serious. She'd look up at him with those impossible eyes and ask whether he felt, deep down, that he was always pretending, a man performing the role of himself, never quite able to believe his own lines. "Do you ever wish you could just slip out of character?" she said once, tracing lazy circles on his chest. "Like be someone entirely new for a day." Back then he'd laughed, chalking it up to the late hour and the heady aftermath of orgasms. "Of course I do," he'd said, not really meaning it. "Doesn't everyone?" Now sitting at the dinner table with the two men, game show uncle and sitcom grandfather, James felt as though he were living inside a dream crafted from Mary's questions and obsessions. Even the food was staged. TV dinner trays, mashed potatoes piped into perfect swirls, green beans a uniform shade of radioactive emerald. The glasses were filled with grape Kool-Aid, which neither uncle nor grandfather drank. When James tried to take a sip, the uncle leaned forward, winked, and said, "Survey says," as if any movement required its own laugh track. He looked at Mary. She was unfazed by the spectacle, cutting her meatloaf into precise cubes and eating each one with the deliberation of an astronaut. Every now and then she would toss James a look of such perfect composure it made him uneasy. It wasn't just that she was calm in the presence of family weirdness. It was that she seemed to be waiting for something, as though the night were a game designed for his benefit, and she was silently willing him to keep playing along. His mind did what it always did under stress. It catalogued. He began to tally the oddities, assembling them into a taxonomy of the uncanny. The old man's laughter, which always landed a fraction of a second too late, as if he were listening to a delayed feed. The uncle's hands, which never trembled or fidgeted, but held every gesture in a freeze frame of perfect, almost plastic stillness. Even the family photos on the wall were wrong. In every snapshot, the faces smiled too widely, the pupils caught by the camera in a way that made them look painted on. James tried to tell himself that this was just what happened to families after too much television and too few other interests, a kind of arrested development, harmless enough if you squinted. But then he looked at the place settings: 4 plates, 4 sets of utensils. He realized with a start that he hadn't seen Mary's son all night. She spoken of him so often that James had expected the kid to be orbiting, a minor planet in the family system, sneaking into the fridge or playing video games in the den. He glanced toward the hallway, where a closed door pulsed with the flicker of television light. Mary caught his gaze and smiled. "He's just finishing his homework," she said, as if reading his mind. "He'll join us soon." He nodded, but the words rattled in his head. Homework, on a Friday night after 9 o'clock. And still the silence behind the door was thick and total. No clack of keyboard, no muttered complaints, not even the telltale hum of animation. He tried to imagine what kind of child Anthony must be, living in the shadow of such extravagant family theater. Was he a fellow mimic, a prodigy of imitation? Or perversely, a total blank? A kid so unformed that his family's personalities had simply washed over him, leaving nothing behind. The question occupied James as the meal progressed. He picked at his food, mostly out of politeness, and filled the gaps in conversation with stories from his own childhood: his mother's soup recipes, his father's penchant for crossword puzzles and Jeopardy reruns. The uncle lapped up these anecdotes, responding to every detail with a ready-made game show catchphrase, while the grandfather simply nodded and occasionally barked. "By golly, that's a good one." It began to dawn on James that neither man had once asked him a direct question about himself. It was as if their exchange was governed by a script, one in which the visitor's purpose was simply to produce more lines for the canned laughter to punctuate. Eventually, Mary stood up from the table, wiped her mouth on a paper napkin, and said, "I'll go get Anthony." She left the room with a lightness that seemed almost performative, as if she were stepping out for a commercial break. James listened to her footsteps recede down the hallway, then disappear behind the closed door. He sat in the sudden quiet, feeling the eyes of both men settle on him. The uncle smiled, his teeth bared in a game show host's approximation of warmth. "So, James," he said, "what's your final answer?" James hesitated, then shrugged. "About what?" The uncle looked at the grandfather, who cackled and said, "You should always lock in your answer, son. That's the secret." For a moment, James wondered if this was some kind of elaborate hazing ritual, an initiation for boyfriends, a test of how much weirdness one could endure before bolting. He tried to play along, even as his skin prickled with the knowledge that he was being watched, assessed, measured against an invisible yardstick. Mary returned to the dining room slowly, her left hand curled gently around the slender wrist of a boy who trailed beside her like a ghost in an old photograph. "This is Anthony," she announced in a voice bright as a bell, though something about her inflection carried an undertow, half pride, half relief perhaps. James blinked twice, then stared hard at the child. Anthony was dressed in a style so distinctly antiquated it might have belonged in a dusty black and white rerun. A crisp white collared shirt neatly buttoned to the throat, short pleated pants that ended just above the knees, knee-high socks folded with mathematical precision, and polished leather shoes that gleamed under the overhead chandelier. His dark hair was slicked back in a rigid wave that betrayed not a single stray strand. It was as though someone had taken a snapshot from the 1950s and slid it into the present moment with impossible clarity. But it was Anthony's face that froze James's gaze. It bore none of the hallmarks James had mentally sketched when Mary first spoke of her son. No soft baby fat around the cheeks, no tentative, gap-toothed smile, none of the tentative shyness or mischievous glimmer in the eyes that marked the presence of a living child. Instead, Anthony's features were drawn tight, as though the skin had been stretched across a carved wooden mask. His jaw was firm, unmoving. His eyes were unblinking, wide and luminous, as if two polished marbles had somehow been installed in place of irises, each reflecting the chandelier's glow with disconcerting precision. He moved with an odd mechanical rigidity, every motion deliberate, almost rehearsed. When Mary guided him toward a chair at the long, varnished table, Anthony pivoted at the hips and sat down with his back absolutely straight, both feet planted flat on the hardwood floor. His hands folded exactly at the center of his lap, thumbs touching. He did not fidget. He did not glance around the room. He simply stared at James, as though he meant to examine and memorize every one of his features. The curve of his nose, the set of his eyebrows, the slight tremble in his lower lip. Mary smiled at the boy, then turned back to James. "This is James," she said gently. "He's a guest tonight." Anthony offered a slight nod and spoke in a voice that resonated far deeper than James would have expected from someone so slight in stature. "Nice to meet you, James." The words emerged with a hollow echo, as though they'd been recorded in an empty chamber and replayed. It sounded practiced, rehearsed in front of a mirror until each syllable had been polished smooth. James forced himself to respond with a courteous smile. "Nice to meet you too. How was your homework today?" Anthony paused, blinked twice in the slow, deliberate fashion that now set James's nerves on edge, and said evenly, "It was easy. I like numbers." He added a quick, efficient grin, but it failed to touch his eyes, which remained locked on James's face in unrelenting scrutiny. Mary beamed at her son as though proud of a performance well executed, then shot James a sideways look that seemed to say plainly, "See, nothing strange at all. Don't worry." But James's heart thudded in his chest. Everything about the boy was strange. Anthony's head seemed slightly oversized for his small body, the pale skin so unnaturally smooth that it looked almost translucent, like unbaked dough stretched thin. He seemed far too rigid, too perfect, too aware. James realized with a queasy pang that he had no real sense of how old Anthony was meant to be. Mary had spoken of him in vague terms, very bright for his age, a bit shy, still adjusting, but none of that matched the silent, intense figure now sitting opposite him, hands folded, eyes fixed. As the adults around the table began to serve themselves, scooping roast, heaping potatoes, ladling gravy, the boy's gaze never wavered. He didn't glance at the roast or at the china plates. He watched James. With relentless precision, he followed every dip of James's fork toward the plate, every hesitant swallow, until James felt compelled to drop his eyes or risk meeting that unblinking stare. Mary bent forward, placing a dish of stringy green beans on the table. "Anthony, did you get a chance to finish that library book I asked about?" she prompted, her tone cooing, motherly. "It's finished," he replied without hesitation. "I read every page. The themes were enlightening." His voice was even, almost monotonal. He did not offer any further elaboration. He did not squirm in his seat. He did not wipe his mouth or show any hunger for approval. He simply awaited the next cue. Mary exchanged a quick glance with James, as though reassuring him that everything was under control. "Wonderful," she said. "And how about recess? Did you play any games with Lynn or Mikey today?" Anthony's eyes flicked to Mary, then to James, then back to Mary, as though downloading the question before delivering the answer. "I played tag with Lynn," he said. "I do not mind tag. I do prefer puzzles." He allowed himself the merest twitch of a grin that curled the corners of his mouth upward, in his mind, perhaps, an adequate approximation of a child's enthusiasm. The adults at the other end of the table chattered on, Uncle Richard scoffing at the soggy texture of the roast, Grandfather Joe drifting in and out of awareness, nodding at intervals as though caught between slumber and wakefulness. But all the while, the low hum of an unseen laugh track permeated the room, a relentless undercurrent of canned mirth. James's stomach lurched. He turned his head to the den's open doorway. There, a flat screen nestled in the wall played an old sitcom rerun, its laugh track booming through hidden speakers. Private chuckles, canned applause, belly laughs, all timed to perfection, an absurd double soundtrack to the real conversation. Anthony did not react to the laughter. He didn't acknowledge it, didn't flinch. As though oblivious to it, he continued to study James. Every so often, he would lift his eyes from the table and hold James's gaze in a way that felt unnerving, like a camera lens zooming in too close. James cleared his throat and tried another subject. What about television? Ever watch anything you enjoy? The boy's expression flickered, a fraction of a second, then settled. I don't watch television, he intoned. It's not real. He paused, looked up at Mary, then added, Would you say that, Mother? Mary's face remained serene. She offered only the slightest nod, as if granting permission for that answer and accepting it as complete. She did not push him to elaborate or soften his tone. James swallowed hard, trying to force a forkful of gluey mashed potatoes down his throat. Each bite lodged in his chest like rotting wood. The potatoes were cold and pasty. The gravy was sickly sweet, almost plastic in flavor. The roast was charred at the edges but still raw at its center, bleeding a thin, glistening liquid into the gravy. Even the green beans tasted of nothing but metal. He glanced around the table. Uncle Richard, laughing along with the sitcom, pounded his fist on the table in perfect sync with the recorded guffaws. Grandfather Joe, blinking slow and heavy as if waking from a dream, would crack a smile, just for the punchline, and then slump forward again, eyes closing. Mary offered polite bites and soft murmurs of encouragement to everyone else, but Anthony never lifted a morsel to his mouth. He sat, his posture ceremonial, his eyes locked on James, as though waiting for something to happen. Conversation turned to holiday plans, Mary's plans to take Anthony to the zoo next week, the possibility of a family outing to the mountains. Anthony answered each question with the same clipped cadence, hinting at interest but never showing any real excitement. When Mary asked if he looked forward to seeing the penguins, he simply tilted his head and said, "Penguins are aquatic birds. I have read about them." Then he offered a swift nod, and his gaze returned immediately to James. After what felt like an eternity, James realized his water glass was empty. He reached for it, but it had somehow slipped entirely out of reach. He shifted, saw the glass sitting untouched at his place setting, empty, exactly where it had begun. He hadn't sipped at it once since the meal began. He realized then that he'd been so absorbed by the boy's eerie stillness, by the canned laughter echoing off the walls, by the grotesque parody of a family dinner unfolding around him, that he'd almost forgotten to eat or drink. Panic fluttered in his chest. He looked at Mary, who gave him a gentle, apologetic smile and poured him more water. "Here you go," she said, handing him the glass. But even the water tasted off, as though filtered through some metallic, rusty pipe. Anthony, sensing perhaps a shift in the room's energy, blinked twice in his deliberate fashion and spoke without preamble. "May I be excused?" His voice was calm, utterly devoid of childish hesitancy. Mary glanced at the clock on the wall, silent, ticking, then nodded. "Of course. Why don't you go read in the den for a bit?" she suggested. The boy rose with the same precision he'd used to sit, pivoting on his heels, then walked toward the den without so much as a backward glance. As he passed James, the faintest scent of something chalk, sterile plastic, wafted from him, a fleeting odor that dissolved in the air almost as soon as it touched James's nostrils. James exhaled slowly, as though releasing a held breath he hadn't been conscious of. Mary returned her attention to him, concerned about softening her smile. "Are you all right?" she asked. He nodded, unable to form words. The silent weight of Anthony's presence still lingered in the room, a cold, calculated impression. Uncle Richard let out another laugh in perfect time with the television. Grandfather Joe stirred, and Mary resumed her small talk. But James could think only of that pale-faced boy in a vintage schoolboy uniform, sitting motionless at his mother's table, watching him with unblinking eyes, as if calculating and cataloging every detail. And James knew, with an unsettling certainty, that he would never unsee the astonishing precision of Anthony's performance, nor unhear the faint, mechanical echo in his voice. The conversation, if it could be called that, soon turned. It was as if the entire family had conspired to shift the spotlight onto him, to excavate his past and dissect it for entertainment. Richard opened with the easy stuff, the "tell us about yourself, James" line, but it quickly devolved into a barrage of questions so intimate and oddly specific that James found himself stumbling, caught off guard by how much they already seemed to know. My granddad told me a war story he swore wasn't in the history books. Text story. My granddad never talked about the war. That's important. He didn't tell heroic stories. He didn't correct documentaries on TV. He didn't even say which war he fought in, just the war, like there was only ever one worth remembering. Whenever someone asked, he'd shrug it off and leave the room, cigarette trembling slightly between his fingers. So when he asked me to sit down and listen, I knew something was wrong. It was late evening. The house was quiet in that uncomfortable way, like it was holding its breath. My granddad sat in his old armchair, the one with the torn fabric and the faint smell of smoke that never went away. The lamp beside him buzzed softly. "Lock the door," he said without looking at me. I laughed a little. "Why?" "Just do it." I did. Then he told me to close the curtains, all of them, even the small one by the back door. When I finished, he nodded, satisfied, and finally looked at me. His eyes were wet, not crying, just strained, like he hadn't slept in days. "You ever hear of a unit that doesn't exist?" he asked. I shook my head. "Good," he said. "Means it worked." He lit a cigarette with shaking hands and took a long drag. The smoke curled toward the ceiling, thick and sour. "We weren't soldiers," he began. "Not officially. No uniforms, no names, just numbers we memorized and then forgot. If we died, there was no letter home, no body, no record." I asked him what they did. He stared at the wall behind me. "We went where the war didn't make sense." He told me about a village they were sent to clear. No name on the map, no roads leading to it. Just coordinates that changed every time they checked them. When they arrived, the place was intact, houses standing, doors unlocked, fires still warm, no people. "They thought it was abandoned," my granddad said. "I knew it was." He said there were signs everywhere, plates with half-eaten food, children's shoes lined neatly by doorways, a radio still playing softly in one house, repeating the same phrase in a language he didn't recognize. They searched for hours. Then one of the men screamed. They found him standing in the middle of the square, rifle on the ground, staring straight up at the sky. He was crying so hard he couldn't breathe. He kept saying the same thing, my granddad whispered. "They're between the seconds." That night something moved through the village. Not footsteps, not vehicles, but pressure, like the air itself was being displaced. They heard doors opening and closing, but when they checked, everything was exactly as it had been before. Except the mirrors. Every mirror they found was covered, smashed, turned to the wall. In one house, they found scratch marks around the frame, like someone had tried desperately to rip it down with their hands. "They told us not to look at our reflections after sunset," my granddad said. "Didn't tell us why." The next morning, 2 men were gone. No blood, no struggle. Just empty beds and uniforms neatly folded at the foot, boots placed side by side like they'd undressed themselves. That's when the radio started working again. It wasn't broadcasting news, it was counting, slowly, calmly, always stopping just before reaching the same number. "They told us if it ever reached that number, we were to shoot ourselves," my granddad said flatly. I asked him why. He finally looked at me then, really looked at me. "Because whatever was coming after didn't leave bodies." On the third night, my granddad said he broke the rule. He looked into a mirror. "I didn't see myself," he said. "I saw something standing behind me, wearing my face like it didn't quite fit." His voice cracked then, just slightly. It smiled before I did. The order came at dawn. Immediate withdrawal, no debrief, no medals, no explanation. They burned the village behind them, but the flames didn't spread properly, like the buildings refused to catch. Before they left, the radio finally finished counting. Nothing happened. For weeks after, the men kept watch over each other, terrified of sleeping. One by one, they disappeared, not killed, not discharged, but erased. My granddad was the only one left. "That thing," he said quietly, crushing the cigarette into the ashtray. "It followed me home. Not right away, it was patient." I swallowed. "Granddad, why are you telling me this now?" He reached out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Because it started counting again," he said. I laughed nervously. "You're joking." He stood up slowly and walked to the hallway mirror. He didn't look into it. He covered it with a towel. "I heard it last night," he said. "On the radio, on the TV, in the gaps between words." He leaned closer to me, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's closer this time." That was when the house went completely silent. No buzzing lamp, no ticking clock, no distant traffic. Just a faint, steady counting sound coming from my phone, which was face down on the table. And when I flipped it over, the screen wasn't showing a number, it was showing my reflection, smiling just a second before I did. It all started when my uncle gave me his old VCR. He was moving to another country and couldn't bring some of his possessions with him. Along with his VCR, he had gifted me VHS tapes of Big Daddy and the first two Austin Powers movies. I was thankful, but rewatching the same three movies was getting really old, so I went online to search to see if any places still sold VHS tapes. I happened upon an ad stating there was a flea market opening this weekend and decided to go. I got up early Saturday to drive to the flea market. I ended up buying some toys that I used to have as a kid for nostalgia and a $20 pinball machine that definitely looked like it was on its last legs, but I was told it worked perfectly. I later found out that it was a bullshit lie. I was about to head home when out of the corner of my eye saw a vendor selling old VHS tapes. The vendor was an old man with an eye patch. As I approached his stand, I noticed he had patches of hair missing from his head, and it could have been my eyes playing tricks on me, but it looked like he was missing bits of skin off his fingers and missing fingernails. He noticed me and greeted me with a "Hello, Sonny. How can I help you?" After which he would give me a smile with a lot of teeth missing. I greeted him back and told him that I was just browsing, after which I would start looking around to see what he had for VHS tapes. I found a couple that piqued my interest, but paused as I found what to me was the holy grail from this flea market. It was a tape with a faded-out label that said Tom and Jerry. I loved Tom and Jerry as a kid. It was one of my favorite cartoons growing up. I asked the old man how much it was, but as soon as he saw the tape, he began to shake. "I threw you out. How the hell did you get back here?" he shouted. The sudden shout made me jolt. The old man told me to take the tape and to go away at once. I asked him how much the other tapes were, but was told that they were free and to get the hell away from him. It was weird. Did I offend him somehow? I thought, but hey, it's nice getting free stuff, right? I ordered a pizza and planned on binge-watching all the VHS tapes I had found today, getting comfy in baggy pajama bottoms and an old t-shirt I hadn't washed in a week. I started with Good Burger and followed it with the first season of Dragon Ball GT. I had eaten 6 slices of pizza and had downed 2 bottles of Dr. Pepper when I got up to play the VHS tape of Tom and Jerry. I rewound the tape just in case it hadn't been, since people rarely ever did, and got back to my couch as I pressed play. I was startled when I heard a scream for half a second as the tape began, but summed it up to being a glitch. The tape was old after all. I was hit with a huge nostalgia trip as the tape started with the lion that would roar in the logo at the start of the episode, followed by the Tom and Jerry intro. The title card showed the name of the episode, which was titled Pico's Pest. I was confused. I had never heard of the episode, but as soon as it began, I recognized that it was the episode where Jerry's country-singing grandpa came to visit. Jerry's uncle began to play the song Crambone and stuttered as he sang. I laughed. I remember this episode so well now, how Jerry's uncle would break the strings of his guitar and take Tom's whiskers as replacements. As the song continued, the camera panned over to Jerry, who had a look of despair. "Run," Jerry said, but soon after the camera glitches and he was clapping along to his uncle's song. Wait a minute, Jerry talked in this episode, I thought. I don't remember that. I brushed it off as the song continued. Then the first string broke. I felt something trickling down my ear and went to feel what it was. I brought my finger in front of me and saw that it was wet with blood. Why was my ear bleeding? I thought. I looked up at the TV and barely saw Jerry's uncle staring at me. I jumped off my couch before he went away and looked for Tom. I went to the bathroom to get a towel. I wiped the blood out of my ears, and just then I heard the scream of Tom. Jerry's uncle must have gotten one of his whiskers. By the time the song began again, I was already heading for my joke. Once again, the string on Jerry's uncle's guitar broke and I fell to the ground. I tried to get up but couldn't feel my legs. I started to panic. "Where's that old pussy cat?" Jerry's uncle said as he searched for Tom. I looked at the TV and saw Tom with hyperrealistic tears in his eyes and blood pouring down from his cheek where his whiskers once were. "Help me," he begged as Jerry's uncle rose from behind him, raising his guitar and slamming it down on Tom's head. "Found ya," Jerry's uncle shouted. He had left a guitar-shaped dent in Tom's head, and Tom began to shake and blink rapidly. Tom had gotten 4 more whiskers ripped out, along with some fur, revealing Tom's bloody skin. Jerry rushed to Tom's aid but was stopped by his uncle. Jerry's uncle was gripping Jerry's tail when suddenly he ripped it out along with Jerry's spine. "Woo-wo doggy, this'll do nicely, nephew," Jerry's uncle said. Jerry dropped to the ground in a pool of his own blood that leaked out of where his tail had once been. I was scared. What the hell was I watching and why could I move? Crambone began to play again, and just as I feared, the guitar's string broke once more. Suddenly, all I saw was darkness. I was now blind. I shouted for help and cried, as I was scared and confused about what was going on. "Don't you cry now, lil' fella." A voice appeared right beside me. A touch of someone's tiny fingers rubbed down my back and stopped at my pelvis. I felt a sharp pain as something made a hole in my back, and I felt my spine slowly being pulled out from my back, tearing my skin apart for my spine to come out. I cried in pain as it was finally out and I heard something being carved. "Now boy, you're gonna help me with this little number here." The voice explained, then I realized the voice was Jerry's uncle. "I broke my damn guitar over that in Pussy Cat's head, so I gotta make a new one. Your spine should do just nicely once I'm done carving." I begged him to stop and asked why he was doing this. What he responded with was, "I need to finish my song and so the Crambone can feast." As the song started up for the last time, I tried to drag myself away but couldn't. I couldn't move my arms and had no idea where I was going. Suddenly, my heart stopped as the string of the spine guitar broke. The last words I would hear before I died were, "Ooh-oh. Froggy went ACCC courtin' and he ride Crambone." The end. Is that really my teacher? Text story. I'm not sure if this kind of story is a creepypasta since I'm new at all these creepypasta stuffs, but here you go. For context, back when I was in elementary, I have this really strict and kind of annoying teacher. Let's name him Mr. Gomez. You have no idea how much I hate this teacher. He would scold me and shout at me for failing to do something small. It drives me crazy every time. And of course there was a time I wish he was dead. I was so happy when I was finally able to get out of that elementary school where a teacher like Mr. Gomez exists. My high school years were better. Definitely, I met old and new friends and was able to finally find my passion that comes 10th grade. I was happy, of course, to be able to survive high school up to this point. I was happy, excited even. But then I learned that Mr. Gomez, yes, that Mr. Gomez became a teacher here at this exact high school and is a math teacher of my exact class. I was bummed. I knew I was in for a hell and I was right. Then comes 5 months after Mr. Gomez became my teacher in 10th grade. This is when I noticed something strange, specifically, felt something strange. I knew that Mr. Gomez was strict and annoying, but lately it feels like his strictness and anger is forced. You know that feeling when someone is clearly faking but you can't prove it. Yeah, that exact same feeling. Of course, to some of my classmates it looks normal. But for me it's definitely weird in this classroom. I know Mr. Gomez the most. He became my teacher in elementary. I witnessed everything about him. So I know how he is when he's strict and angry, and what he is showing lately is not it. As days goes by, it's become more certain to me that it was not the same Mr. Gomez I know. I started having conspiracies, specifically, a theory that someone somehow got a realistic mask of Mr. Gomez and acted like him. I was watching a lot of conspiracy theory documentaries that time, so you know. After a few days of observing Mr. Gomez, I finally decided to test him. I pretended to drop a pen near him and kneeled down to grab it while I'm on my way standing up. I carefully looked at the skin and texture of his face. I did this cause I am still onto that fake mask theory of mine, but when I checked, it looks real, too real. Personally, I've seen a fake realistic mask before, so I can definitely tell if it was fake. But no. It looks real. Sure, from afar realistic masks will surely look real. But this is different. I'm looking at it in a near position, almost face to face. I find that weird, I thought to myself. Where did he get such good quality mask? But then a group of my classmates was passing around a cutter, and after playing at it for a while one of them accidentally swings it at Mr. Gomez's face. I noticed it and thought, good, now I can see that it's a face mask. But then I looked, and he was bleeding. I expected to at least see some sort of signs that it's a face mask, but his face is actually bleeding as if he doesn't have a mask. And that's not the weirdest part. When he got the cut, we expected him to be fuming mad, but no. He just smiled, eerily I might add, and went outside. Later he came back with a band-aid in the face where he has the cut. My classmates apologized after. I couldn't sleep that night. That felt weird and creepy. I knew feel down that it's not Mr. Gomez, but why is there no sign of fakeness in his physical looks? Then finally, I decided to test him one final time. The next day I came to school, Mr. Gomez still having the band-aid in his face, teaches our class as per usual. I waited till everyone is out of the classroom before I went to Mr. Gomez and asked him a question. A single question that will define whether he is fake or not. Mr. Gomez, have you met my grandma before? She said she spoke to you 2 months ago. I waited for his answer. I stood there as he smiled and said, "Ah, yes, your grandma. Yes, of course I knew her. I talked to her 2 months ago and told her how good of a student you are." I stayed silent, and everything went silent around me. My grandma died when I was in kindergarten. Mr. Gomez couldn't have met her. I acted normal and said goodbye. I ran back home, feeling creeped out. I just proved that it was a fake Mr. Gomez and not a real one. I have no idea what to do. What am I supposed to do now? I have proven that he is fake. Now what? I didn't let it get obvious. I went to his class every day as normal. But then a week later, I was at my friend's house having a sleepover. It was around 9 p.m. I went downstairs from my friend's room and grabbed a glass of water. His mom was watching the news. That's when I heard it. A man was found dead in a camping site. It was said that the body was dead for a month now. I was curious, so I looked at it and saw it. I almost dropped the glass of water. when in the news they showed a blurred photo of the man. His face was blurred, but I could tell. It was Mr. Gomez. But I just met him yesterday. He taught the class yesterday, so. How? There's gotta be some sort of inaccuracies in their investigation. How could he have died a month ago when he just taught in my class yesterday? That's when it hits me. A month ago. That was when I started noticing and feeling strange about Mr. Gomez. Could it be that this fake killed Mr. Gomez? If yes, why? Before I could collect my thought, I snapped back at it as my phone rings. I answered the phone. It was from my mom. She's probably calling to check up on me, or that's what I thought. But instead I got something else. Something I don't know how to feel about. I don't know if I want to feel scared, or worried, or both. As my mother on the other line said the sentence, "Honey, why didn't you tell me that your teacher, Mr. Gomez, will come visit you at our house?" The silence in the Appalachians. Text story. One summer, my friend and I decided to go camping deep in the Appalachian Mountains, far off the marked trails, somewhere we thought was untouched, somewhere wild enough to feel like a real adventure. The drive took hours, winding through narrow dirt roads lined with trees so massive they blocked out the sun. By the time we arrived at our chosen clearing, daylight was already starting to thin. The first thing we did was build a fire. My friend, Mason, collected branches while I cleared a space for the pit. Sparks snapped up into the fatting sky as the fire took shape, and a warm, orange glow washed over the mossy forest floor. We set up our tents next, joking about black bears and mountain lions, laughing like idiots who didn't know any better. For a while, everything felt perfect. We sat around the fire listening to the crackling flames, the rustle of animals in the underbrush, the distant hooting of an owl. We talked about college, about work, about everything and nothing. We ate snacks and complained about mosquitoes. It was normal. Until it was. It started subtly at first, just a shift in tone, a feeling like something had changed. The night sounds stopped one by one. First the crickets fell silent, then the owls, then even the wind seemed to die. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty but full, as if something else had replaced the noise, something that was listening. "Do you hear that?" Mason whispered. I nodded, but before I could say anything, a sound broke the quiet. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. They were coming from somewhere behind the tree line, far enough that we couldn't see anything, but close enough that we knew whatever it was big. The footsteps stopped just out of sight. "Probably a deer," I said, though my voice cracked with uncertainty. "No deer walks like that," Mason whispered. We stared into the black forest, waiting to see movement, eyes shining, anything. But nothing came. Eventually, after minutes of staring and holding our breath, we convinced ourselves we were imagining things. The woods play tricks, especially at night. But then we smelled it. A sour, metallic stink, like old blood mixed with wet earth. It drifted through the clearing in a slow, nauseating wave. Mason gagged. I tried to convince myself it was some dead animal nearby. Then came the whistle. It was a long, trembling tune, like someone trying to mimic a human whistle, but getting it wrong. The sound warbled, dipped too low, then too high, as if the whistler had never actually heard a human but was trying to reproduce the memory of one. Mason stood up fast. "Nope, we're leaving tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow," I hissed. "I say we go now." Before we could argue, the whistle came again, closer this time, much closer. We doused the fire with dirt as fast as we could, plunging ourselves into near-total darkness. We grabbed our flashlights, but neither of us dared turn them on. A beam of light would tell whatever whistled where we were. We crouched behind my tent, trying to slow our breathing. Then something massive moved just beyond the clearing. The branches snapped like bones. Leaves rustled in heavy waves. Something brushed against the trunk of a huge oak with a deep, grinding scrape, like claws dragging through bark. Mason leaned close. "What the hell is that thing?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was tight with terror. Then came the voice. "Hello." It was human almost. The pitch wavered unnaturally, as if someone was stretching the word like taffy. It echoed strangely, too loud, too hollow. No human voice should bend the way it did. Mason's eyes widened in the darkness. "That's not a person." "Hello," the voice repeated, this time from behind us. I whipped around. Nothing there but trees. Another hello came from the left, then the right, then from somewhere above us. It was mimicking itself, circling us, learning. Mason snapped, "Run." We sprinted blindly through the trees, branches slashing at our arms and legs. Behind us, the footsteps returned, no longer slow, no longer hesitant. They crashed through the woods like an avalanche. Crunch, crack, thunder, crunch. And layered over the footsteps, the voice screamed. "HLLO, HLLO, HLLO, HLLO." We ran until the forest opened into a rocky ledge overlooking a steep drop. Mason skidded to a stop. I nearly slammed into him. "We can't go back," he gasped. The crashing footsteps were closing in. The voice was right behind us now, whispering the word in a dragging, distorted moan. "Hello." Then we saw it. A shape emerged from between the trees. Something tall, far taller than any man, its limbs too long, joints bending at angles that made my stomach twist. Its face, if you could call it that, was stretched smooth and pale, with a lipless mouth that hung open too wide, exposing rows of small, human-like teeth. It smiled. A long, deliberate, human imitation of a smile. "Hello." The thing lunged. Mason shoved me sideways. Its clawed hand slammed into him instead, sending him over the cliff with a choked scream. I scrambled backward, slipping on stones, tears blurring my vision. The creature bent over the ledge, staring down at where Mason had fallen. Then slowly it turned its head toward me. That awful, stretched smile widened. It took a step toward me. Then another. I don't remember how I escaped. I woke up hours later, lying in the dirt by the trailhead, covered in scratches and frost despite it being summer. Search teams never found Mason. They called it an accident, an animal attack, a fall. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear it. From the tree line outside my window. That warped, broken whistle. And the voice, stretching the word just like before. "Hello."